Tarot shouldn't freak you out. Tarot should give you a toolkit. Tarot should give you the little alarm warning to say that the freezer door's open. It should work at that level for you, and it's how you approach it is how it works for you.
Salutations, listeners, and welcome back to Glitch Bottle, the podcast where we uncork the uncommon in magic, mysticism, and the generally misunderstood. I'm Alexander F., and today we are so excited to welcome back to the podcast author, occultist, magical teacher, and tarot expert, Josephine McCarthy. It is always such an honor when Josephine returns to the podcast, and listeners, if this is your first time listening to Josephine, I definitely encourage you to check out episodes number 48 and 59 as well. Lots of great ground covered there. Josephine is based in the UK and has been active in magic for nearly 40 years, while teaching and writing on Western mystery themes for more than 25 years. And Josephine began teaching magical groups in 1993 in the USA and in the UK, and she's authored dozens of books on magic that offer a constellation of different focus areas and in-depth exploration of topics. Josephine's also the director of Quaria, which is a really effective, free online magical training course that takes participants from apprentice to adept. And in this episode, we're so thankful for Josephine's time because she is going to discuss her latest book, Tarot Skills for the 21st Century, Mundane and Magical Divination. This is where Josephine presents the art and science behind tarot divination with a lucidity and a direct approach that is a joy to read and learn from. Josephine touches on the core tarot practices that make this form of divination work, and she also talks about pitfalls to avoid with tarot, how to keep your deck and yourself clean, and she also answers your awesome and elucidating Glitch Bottle Patreon listener questions, and touches on what to keep in mind and in practice with COVID-19 and so much more. And now to help us uncork the uncommon, let's welcome back Josephine McCarthy. Josephine McCarthy, thank you so much for taking the time and stopping by the Glitch Bottle podcast again.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on again. You're a glutton for punishment.
Well, punish away, Josephine, because I truly think that the world needs this right now more than ever, and your book was so great. It was lucid. It was laid out in a way where even someone like myself can actually learn from it. Before we get into the book, though, Josephine, you first started working with tarot in your mid-teens. Was there a particular incident, or was there some kind of event that happened with tarot where you said, there's something to this, or was this more gradual? How did you first start getting involved?
I'd been around tarot for quite a while, and one of my sisters, there's a ton of us, we're Catholic, so there's babies in every cupboard. But one of my sisters was also a tarot reader, and it was virtually everyone around us at the time was doing it. They weren't into magic or anything. It was just they were nosy. We'd keep track of what the neighbours were doing, who was screwing who, who's doing what. And so it was just a natural progression to then start doing my own readings and learning it for myself. So there was never any question for me of does it work or not, because I'd seen it in action many times and seen it being absolutely spot on. So it was just, I'm at that age now, I need to get cracking and start learning. So I did, and just played around with it.
Did you just kind of, when you first started, stick with a specific layout or a specific strategy of divination, or was it just kind of, learning everything you could at that point?
I stuck with one particular layout for a long time, probably about 6 years. And it's a big layout of, you put out 12 major cards and then on top of them 12 minor cards. So you've got cause and effect. And I didn't realize it at the time, but that was a perfect way to teach me. Because when you're looking at tarot, the trump cards are the powers that trigger. These are the fate patterns, the fate powers. And the minor cards are how is that fate pattern, how is that power going to manifest itself? And a lot of people don't realise that when they're using a mixed deck. So doing it that way, I learned without realising the cause and effect very, very early on. But the interrelationships between the 12 positions were a bit more loose, so I had to figure that myself and work on it. And it took time. And what I do is, if I did an important reading, I'd write it down. And I started that right from the earliest day. Write it down and then see what happens and then go back and, oh, okay, it didn't mean that, it meant this. And then I'd make a note of it. That card can mean this. And so I built up a notebook with each card of all the different ways it can tell a story. And did it that way and just nosed around and see who was doing what. And of course, at that age, 14, am I going to get a boyfriend? Am I going to get this? Am I going to do that? And then when I started doing readings for other people, then I started to learn the energetic issues because I'm very empathic and, again, didn't know because I thought everyone was like this and started to get nausea and headaches with some readings that I do for some people and then feeling very sticky and very dirty and gooey and then I'd feel things following me around after I'd done heavy readings for someone. And so it took a few years of that for someone to come along and say, do you clean yourself when you do readings for other people? It's like, what? Do you clean your deck? What? Just never occurred to me. And so she took me in hand and said, right, don't let people touch your deck. Lesson number 1. Keep your relationship very strong with your deck. You're the one doing the reading, not them. You touch the cards, not them. Clean yourself after you've done a session. And don't keep doing lots of readings for lots of people because that's what's making you sick. If it's necessary, do the reading. If it's not necessary, don't do it. But if you're doing an unnecessary reading to learn, then do it with that intent. And it shifts how your energies work. And this is why a lot of tarot readers get drained off and get chronic fatigue and things like that, is because they're doing client after client after client and not realizing that they're taking fragments of the crap of that person and they're carrying it for them. And it doesn't happen to everyone, but it happens to enough that, you know, if you're going to be doing long-term job of reading for people, is that you need to have a proper strategy to stay clean and healthy. So I basically learned by fucking up lots of times and not knowing what the hell this reading is saying and then it happening and going, oh, okay, I get it. Which I think is the best way to learn rather than going on a course or anything like that, is you just figure it out as you go along.
What you're saying, Josephine, is, if I'm understanding it right, that casual reading in terms of just grabbing a deck, not worrying about anything else and just throwing the cards, that is not the best way. You need to have reverence for the deck. You need to make sure that you're energetically clean. That's like the first thing you should do.
It's not reverence for the deck. I have seen a lot of writing from people where they're talking about, oh, it's sacred and it's this and you have to treat it like that. No, what you do is you treat it like that really expensive chainsaw. So you oil it, you maintain it, you keep it clean so it doesn't get clogged up, you check the blades. It's a tool, it's a working tool. It's not a sacred thing, it's just a vocabulary. But it's one that you need to look after so that it continues to work and that you don't get sticky and drained from it. Keeping your deck clean, this is the other thing, is that people, they'll buy a deck and to them it's this very special thing and they want it to last forever. Like chainsaws, they don't last forever, and you have to get the mentality that you're going to have to replace it at some point because it will get unworkable. What you do is, if there's one particular deck that you really love, is get 2 or 3 copies of it so that you've got backup. And what I do when a deck gets dirty, if I've had to do a lot of very difficult readings, is I just get a plastic bag and I put some ordinary table salt in it, put the deck in, give it a really good shake, and then lay it out to dry in the sunshine, and then put it away again. The other thing that I do is, if I'm doing a reading, is I have a piece of cloth, something simple. I've used tea towels before now, but can go in the washing machine, and you put them on the surface. You put the cloth on the surface and then put the cards on the cloth. And again, it's just so they're not picking up energetic crap from whatever is on the surface of the table or whatever. It just keeps them clean, which makes them easier to work with. If you're handing them to other people to do the shuffling, people carry a lot of energetic crap around with them. It's normal. It's not a bad thing. It's just normal. But it gets stuck on the deck, so the deck gets dirtier a lot quicker, which makes it harder to get a clear reading. So when I was told never let someone touch your deck, there was no reason why. So I ignored it after a while because I wanted to see what happened. And then I realised when I was just shuffling, my hands would feel disgusting and then I get a headache. And it was all the energetic crap that built up from various different people. So, it's a tool. Keep it clean, look after it, and it lasts a long time. And then when it starts falling apart because of the salt degenerates it eventually, then you use the new deck. I think people these days, they don't know where the barriers between the sacred and the mundane is. And so anything that's to do with magic, they'll treat as sacred because they want to be respectful and they don't know what is and what isn't. But magical, things like tarot is a tool. It literally is just a tool. So you maintain it to keep it clean, not because it's special.
To that point, Josephine, I remember, I believe it was in our first chat that you mentioned, it in many ways comes down to patterns and how someone who is sensitive can, say, walk into, your place or another expert magician, and something on the surface might look mundane, quote unquote, but in reality, there are these patterns that are effectively encrypted, and if you have the necessary requisite training and sensitivity, that you can actually decrypt all of the patterns. And it sounds like with tarot, that's a very similar thing.
Yeah, it is. It's anything that you work with in magic is patterns. Fate is a series of interlocking patterns. And what the tarot does is resonate in to pick up information from those patterns.
We do, Josephine, have a listener question from Ryan, who is saying, I always get a little giddy when I see that Josephine is coming back on the show. And Ryan says, Josephine, you've mentioned previously the importance of paying attention in magic. How can paying attention to what is happening on a specific card change or expand the results of the reading? For example, Josephine, you mentioned how the position of the magician on the ladder could speak to someone's magical maturity.
Yeah, I wasn't 100% sure of what Ryan was getting at. But yeah, when you, especially as a magician and you're doing a magical reading, any card divination, the tarot deck itself is just one method of using cards. Use lots of different cards. But when you do a reading, the card will have a series of different meanings that are different layers. And sometimes they can go so mundane, they're literal, like the Chariot is literally talking about your car. But there's another layer to the Chariot that is talking about moving forward in fate. It's your vehicle that is moving you through your fate patterns. And then there's another layer again where the Chariot is talking about the evolution of the mystic or the magician, where it's the Chariot that lifts them closer to the divine patterns. So there's all these different layers, and you can get situations where you're doing a very mundane reading for someone that you don't know. And so you're reading it literally, or in a mundane, but actually speaking magically. And what you have to do is pay attention to all the other cards that have come out in direct relation to the question and to the person. And then you start to see two stories coming out. One is answering the mundane question, and one is saying, well, that mundane situation is coming from this deeper underlying pattern that this person is moving through, and that deep underlying pattern is taking them to this stage of evolution that's about their soul. It's not about, whether they're going to get their job or this, that, and the other. So it's answering three different questions when you only asked one. And to do that, you have to pay attention. Anything in magic, you pay attention to the smallest details, and then you will learn as you go along to filter out what's unnecessary. It's a bit like, when people do, Navy SEAL training, and they have to be able to go in a room and clock everything in one look so that they know where everything is. How do you pay attention? You pay attention by paying fucking attention. By looking and thinking and writing it down and going back to it and looking in retrospect and then seeing what's happening in your life, and maybe leave out a reading or photograph it so you can meditate on it, because more and more things will come to the surface. The deck itself, whatever deck you're using, it really depends. There are some decks that are very pretty. They're very beautiful. They're very beautifully produced, but they're like a dead stop with information. So it's about choosing a deck that has imagery or word connection that taps into deeper magical patterns. And this is what Waite and Pixie did, was in their own time was look as to how many different layers they could actually put in, so that it wasn't just a literal mundane divination deck. It's also a deck that tells you about the magical process. It's not a great deck. I stopped using it in my 20s because it's limited. It's very limited in its scope. But it has a lot more depth to it than a lot of the fairy, Celtic, goddess, shamanic, I've got 3 sticks, tarot, whatever. Do you know what I mean? It's like there's something out there for everyone, and they're all valid in their own way. But if you're wanting magical depth, then you need to ensure that the deck that you're looking for has got enough layers to it that you can get those different things from paying attention.
What I really enjoyed, too, about the book is that whole history, late 1800s, early 1900s, when it comes to the initial creation of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, is you talk about the importance of, like, Pamela Coleman Smith and how the role of the initial concept of the deck meeting the proper artistic inspiration and creating something exactly that has symbolism to it as well as more traditional divination. Were there any surprises when you were going through the research?
God, yeah. That was the deck I started with, was the Rider-Waite, and I used that into my mid-20s, and then I started making my own decks. And, you know, I've used it for such a long time and never really looked at it. But also thinking in retrospect, if I'd have looked at it in my 20s, I wouldn't have seen it anyway. I wouldn't have noticed because I didn't know. So there is that. But as I was going through them one by one, and I looked at every single little detail that was in every single card, the minor cards come from playing cards and the Solabusca. You know, you get fragments of the Solabusca in it. But the trump cards, that's the magical path. And so I looked very carefully, and bugger me if I didn't see in the star, in the background, the sycamore tree and the bird. So, yeah, I was like, hang on a minute, that looks a lot like the Bennu bird and the sycamore tree, which would tally with the star, with the card the star, because the Bennu bird is the herald of new beginnings, and the new beginnings that come in the depths of the darkness. So, for example, in the Egyptian funerary texts, the Bennu bird appears at midnight in the deepest part of the Duat. Once you've got to the very darkness, then the first light doesn't happen until the Bennu bird has first appeared. And in the creation myths, the Bennu bird lands, vocalizes, and creates the world. And I was thinking, nah, that can't be right. They can't have, because they wouldn't have known about that. It was a very interesting time, sort of the late 1800s. They knew about Egyptian stuff because of Napoleon. You know, when he went into Egypt, he took loads of artists with him and they drew everything that they saw and recorded everything. So Egyptology it hadn't really started by then, but they knew about Egypt and they knew about the tombs and everything. But in the late 1800s, you've got this amazing come together of minds. So you had Wallis Budge, who was very magical, and he was self-taught in Egyptology. He was doing his thing, and he'd translated the Book of the Dead, the Book of Going Forth by Day, which we called the Book of the Dead, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, and it was the Papyri of Ani, which is a very interesting text, which has the death sequence, and it has the Bennu bird in it. And he did the Book of Gates, and he was also very deeply into Mesopotamian stuff. So you've got all of that. He's there. And the British Museum, the reading room and the reading club, it was the go-to place for all the magicians, the artists, the thinkers, of the day. They all congregated there, and they'd have talks, discussions, they'd do research there, they'd have access to all these amazing books. And that's how the Golden Dawn started, was Mathers sitting in the reading room going through the grimoires and everything else. So I started digging more and more. I started to wonder, well, did Pixie, was she the one that was bringing this stuff through? Because she was incredibly psychic. And you need a very psychic person to work with when you're doing something like this. And we always assume it's the man that's doing all the work. So I thought, right, let's give Pixie a due. Let's have a very close look at this. So I looked, and then I started to notice more and more bits of Egyptian imagery and Babylonian imagery, all hidden away. And they're not done in the Egyptian style. It's like if you get the tarot card of the star out and you look in the background, it's just a tree and it's just a long-beaked bird. It's nothing Egyptian about it, but the actual placing of them in that card, in that position, they knew exactly what they were doing. So I got in touch with Bob Gilbert, who's the expert on weight. We had some long discussions and arguments. We're really good friends. We've been friends for years, and we're great when we get together because we butt heads and then totally agree. And he said, so that's really interesting. He said, I've not noticed that either. Then he went back to Waite's biography notes, because he holds all of Waite's notes. And he'd made a point of saying how difficult it was with Pixie to keep her on cue, online, because she was like an open door for things to come through. And she would just pick up anything. And it was all valid. It was just that she was like a radio, not fully tuned in. And she was more sort of fairy land being type of person. So he talks in his notes about how difficult it was to actually keep her on track with certain cards to make sure she did the right specific imagery. So the imagery was coming from Waite. So, it's like, where was Waite getting it from? He was getting it from Budge. Because you think about at that time, they were all meeting and giving lectures to each other. You had Budge, you had Pixie, I don't know if Pixie was actually in the reading club, but she knew everyone that was there. I don't know if it was a men-only club at the time, I don't know. There was Bram Stoker. There was all these different people who had their fingers in all these different mystical, magical pies. And then you had things like the Papyrus of Ani in the museum. You had the Solar Busker. You had all of these different things there. And this is what they drew on and put it all together. What I find interesting, though, is with these cards, like with the Solar Busker, the idea of woodcut images and cards became very, very popular in the mid-1400s onwards to the mid-1600s with the rise of the printing press. Most of the people doing the most interesting creations were Germans, or the area we now call Germany. And people were doing these woodcuts, and a lot of them were religious. A lot of them were political. Some of them were mystical and political. Some were social comment. And they were literally all over the place. But they weren't used in divination. So it's like with the Solar Busker. We don't know if it was used in divination. It was most likely a playing card deck that also had political commentary on it, because that was the social media of the time. If you wanted to socially engineer how people thought, you would put it in images they played with. So a lot of the very early playing cards are politically stacked or religiously stacked. So with divination, with cards, I thought, right, where is Waite getting the idea from? Because there were other people in the past that used divination. But how far back does it go? At that time when I was looking, I was in conversation with Greta Acher, and he just acquired the full collection of Paracelsus's works. And he was so excited. It was beautifully hand-bound editions. And I'd been given a book of Paracelsus by my dad when I was about 18, and I knew there was something really powerful in it. I just didn't know what it was, so I couldn't understand it, so I'd sleep with it. If I didn't understand something, I'd just put it under my pillow and sleep with it. And in my 20s, I got more into it from his medical stuff, because I was very interested in medical stuff. But I'd never come across some of the stuff that was being discussed in this German edition which is vast. When you look at the works that are available here in this country in English, it's pretty small. But these are a whole shelf load of books by Paracelsus. And he said, what do you think of these? And he showed me a series of 30 woodcuts right in the middle of me writing the history of the decks. It's like, this is, okay, thanks guys, got this, let's have a look at this. I talk about the history of it in the book, but there's something that Paracelsus says, and Paracelsus didn't make them. It was an artist and a poet who had come across them. It was actually a book that was slagging the Pope off, and the artist had made them into woodcuts. Again, this is social engineering, you do it by pictures. And Paracelsus was saying, well, Hans Sachs, his writing, he's too political, he's too this, he's too that, he's not understanding what he's looking at. And Paracelsus was saying there's 3 ways of divination. One is through God, one is through the stars, and one is through magic. And these 30 cards are a work of magic. And this is how you do divination, and you use them for the divination that's of God, not for silly stuff, it's for deeper work. So there you've got late 1400s, somebody talking about these are cards for divination. And that's quite early on. And I'm sure that it happened before, that he wasn't the first, but it's the first I'd come across. Then I realised that Wade had been reading a lot of Paracelsus and Hans Sachs' work. And so and in German, so he will have come across these 30 cards. And Paracelsus is talking about divination and the different layers of divination. So with that, the Sola Busca, and then the Hermetic texts, because a lot of the stuff that's in the cards is Hermetic. There's Egyptian, there's Babylonian, they've basically thrown everything in there and laid it one on top of the other to make a coherent pattern. And it sort of works. It's not 100%, but it's enough that for someone who's starting out in a magical path, that should be the deck they work with, because it teaches them a basic vocabulary that's important. And then once they've got that basic vocabulary and understanding of it, then they can toss it and get something a bit more complex, because it's taught them how to learn a language, which is important. People don't realise when they're reading tarot, you're learning a language. And how you learn that language is important. And once you've learned one language, you can learn any language. And just geeking out on the reading room and who was there. And I was reading off in all sorts of directions, which had nothing to do with tarot, because it's like, ooh, he was there too. Oh, they knew it. Ooh, I wonder if they were having sex. To which Bob Gilbert said, absolutely not.
I remember one of the first things that you shared with listeners when you were on the podcast is some people are so obsessed with only having magical books on their bookshelf, whereas if you look at your bookshelf, for example, you mentioned, ancient Egyptian history and all kinds of different areas that are just so broad beyond. It's so important for a magician to be well versed in other things as well.
Oh, yeah, and the thing is if you're not that well versed in other things, then you don't understand the magical stuff you're looking at. The amount of times that I've read lectures and works by people where they're looking at something magical and they're making all these suppositions about it, and yet the answer is really obvious if they knew their history, if they knew their geography, if they knew social and economic history, if they knew archaeology. If they knew cultures, if they knew the different religions, it's really fucking obvious. It's just that they don't, so they have to theorize. And when you bear in mind that as a magician, when you're doing magic, when you're working in vision, or, you're doing divination and you're getting information, is that your filter is white, Western, American, English, whatever. That's not there with inner contacts. You really need to widen your scope out to be able to understand what information you're being given or what you're being shown. So, yeah, people really do need to widen what they learn, what they look at, how they think about things.
One of the things you mentioned in the book is that there is a limited vocabulary in the tarot deck, and you kind of touch on this, and you also touch on the seeing range of the tarot operator. Can you share with listeners, what do you mean by the vocabulary is limited in the tarot deck, and then how does this tie into the seeing range of the operator?
Vocabulary-wise, you've got 78 cards, and they give you very limited information on their specific thing. So it's like having a vocabulary of only 78 words, but having to have a very in-depth conversation with someone to warn them about something. So when you look at a tarot card, you have to understand that it can mean lots of different things, but within its own range. It's not where, I pick an idea and that will be what it is. It's not like that. It does have specific meaning, but it has applications in lots of different directions, from literal to the bizarre. And so you have to learn, when you're first learning tarot, or if you've been struggling with tarot for a long time, the first hurdle to get over, which will help you a lot, is to understand that you only have these 78 chunks of specific vocabulary information, and from that you have to have a discussion. Now you think, how many words are in English language, right? If we could only use 78 of those words, I'd have to keep reusing the same word in a different context for you to get the meaning. And I give an example of that in the book, like the image of booties. Baby booties can mean small feet. It can mean I'm pregnant, God help you. It can mean, short person. There's lots of different applications for it. We're going for a walk. So it's about learning to look at an image and then think about, okay, very limited vocabulary. How many ways can I apply this card? And if you do that as an exercise, how many different ways can I apply this one card in a vocabulary for a conversation? You will really start to understand the range and limitation of that card. And when you hit the limitations, that's when how the question formation becomes important. If you give an open-ended question, like, am I going to die? Which is always the usual one. And yep, you're going to die. And then they're like, oh my God, Josephine, I'm going to die. And it's like, of course you're going to die. What do you mean? Everyone is going to die, you dick. Did you give it a time range? Well, no. Oh, okay. So, what are you worried about? Oh, well, this came up and this came up, and there's a possibility I might die in the next 3 years. Well, fucking ask that then. Right. And then ask, is that something that I can avoid? Is it set in fate or is it not set in fate? And then you can work from there. So it's about applying logic, boundaries for your questions, and having a good range of understanding of that card, which you get from looking at it and going, how many ways can I apply this in a conversation, in a coffee room, where we're talking about buying a car? How could I apply that card in that conversation?
One of the other really important things that I really love how you do this in the book, Josephine, is you divide the cards, as you touched on earlier, between esoteric meanings and more mundane meanings. And you also touch on the different ways that people use tarot, that there is a divination aspect, but also a psychological aspect that a lot of people use. And I guess the question would be, if you are just learning tarot for the first time and you're going through your book, when you're about to start a session of tarot divination, do you have it in your head at the beginning, I'm looking for an esoteric meaning versus a mundane meaning, or do you simply cast the cards and then look at it afterwards in terms of the different meanings?
I tend to be quite specific, but then what comes out can be completely the opposite. So if I'm asking a magical question, I can usually by now feel whether I'm getting a magical answer or a mundane answer. Depending on the layout, if it's a magical answer, you can see the magical flow through the layout and through the cards, and the layouts are very important as to how you use them. So if it's not flowing like that, if it doesn't look logical, I'll look at it, okay, is it actually a mundane thing that's happening? What I'll do these days, though, because I just don't have time to fuck around too much with stuff, is if I pick up on something coming in that feels big, I'll just do a yes, no. Is this an inner magical thing? Or is this a mundane thing I'm picking up on? So I'll say, is this a magical thing? Yes or no? No. Okay, it's a mundane thing. And before I do any more readings, is this something I need to avoid? No. At that point, I'll stop doing any readings. If I don't need to avoid it, then I need to take it on the chin, whatever it is. Because you can avoid too many things so that you don't then learn and evolve through life's hits and chunks. So I do it that way. I very rarely do readings these days. I don't tend to need to. But yeah, I mean, sometimes you can get really literal stuff. I was just thinking, there was an old friend of mine in Ireland quite a few years ago, had bought an old property and was doing it up, and it was like part castle, part house. And he'd been doing a reading of, how is this going? And he got the tower, and he panicked. And so he said, would you have a look at it? So I got the tower, and it's like, okay, so how is this disaster going to play out? The tower. Yeah, that's not really helpful. Can you show me the manifestation of this destruction? The tower. It's like, dudes, come on. Help me here. It's the tower. The tower in the building fell down and took the roof out. It was literally the tower. So you can get that sometimes when it is that fucking literal. So, and it also has a sense of humour. Tarot does have a sense of humour. So you've got to also bear that in mind. It's like, where am I going? You get the Chariot. You're going in the car. Haha, very funny.
It's like, I got the Wheel of Fortune, and then literally a giant wheel comes cascading down the street and is trying to crush you.
It can happen. And that's where the psychology side of tarot can slip up. There are many different uses for tarot cards. They're all as valid. Psychology, counselling, things like that. But people sometimes, especially when they're first coming into tarot, don't understand that there's a difference. You need to be very clear as to why you're doing what you're doing. Are you looking into a fate pattern, i.e. divination, looking at the future? Are you looking to get insights into a situation? Are you looking for a vocabulary so that your deeper self that's picking up what's going on with that person can speak through the cards? Because, the cards, lots of different things speak through cards, and it's like, what is actually speaking to you? And in a psychological reading, it's often the reader themselves. It's the vocabulary. Their vocabulary is coming out through the cards in order to help that person. Divination works in a completely different way. You're not counselling somebody. You're giving them a little peek into the future. So, yeah, you need to be very clear.
You said that different layouts are really, really important. And one of the things I loved about the book is you lay out so many different ways that you can cast a deck. So, for example, there's an esoteric layout, a health layout, a tree of life layout, an event layout, an angelic layout. I mean, there's so many others that I know I would definitely encourage listeners to, go through it in your book. Why are layouts so important? And can you switch layouts if you recognize that one might not be as conducive to getting the answer?
Layouts are vitally important for good readings. When you're looking at fate and you're looking at time, you're looking at patterns. A layout is a pattern. The pattern becomes a foundation that the information can sit on. So it needs clarity. And not only does it need clarity, it needs magical patterning. So, for instance, with the esoteric layouts, if you look at them, like Quarrier magicians should be able to look at those layouts, if they've gotten at least halfway into the apprentice section, should be able to look at that layout, or there's a few of them, and recognize why those cards are in that position and why does it flow in a particular direction. Because each step in those layouts is the position of a magical position in both ritual, in vision, and in magical patterning, in angelic patterning. So when you're working magically, you're working with certain directions, you're working with certain powers, and they interlock. And between the interlocking, it creates a net that the magic can sit in. And it's the same with the layouts. The esoteric layouts are patterned for direction, power, and being. And they interlock and intersect with each other, so it creates a vessel that the information can flow into and that can then flow to you. With a particular layout, I wouldn't say change a position in that layout because you'll break the whole pattern up. If you're working with those esoteric layouts, it will embed the pattern within you. So then when you come as an adept to work ritually within the depths of that pattern, because each ritual is like a card, it has many layers to it that switch on as you get more and more tuned as a magician. So you stand in the middle of that pattern, you're in the depths of it as an adept, all the powers are flowing through you, you put the layout in exactly the same pattern, you put the layout down, all the power flows through the layout, it flows through you as you're doing the reading, and you get a very powerful reading that gives you a wide scope of information. That's not something for someone who's doing divination because they're learning or they just want to keep it mundane. Not everyone wants to go to those depths. So I made a point of, in the book, that there's a series of different layouts for mundane readings. Yes, no answers. How is this working? What's my next 12 months? Jobs, partnerships, things like that. Health. And the health reading is less for people who are just curious because they'll just frighten the shit out of themselves. It's like if you go to a hospital today and have an all-body MRI, they're going to find different things wrong with you because nobody is perfectly healthy. Especially once you get to your 30s, bits start shriveling up and dropping off. But it's fine. You still work. And it's the same with a health reading. People can terrify themselves. But if somebody's working as a healer, a herbalist, an osteopath, a homeopath, a doctor, there's quite a few doctors that are friends of mine that work with that health reading because it will give them insights as to how is this illness moving around the body? What is it actually doing? What's its source? What's its core? So I put that in there because there's quite a lot of people who use divination who are also healers. And then you got the esoteric readings for the magical lot. And as I was going through the layouts and the explanations, and same with the cards, here's the mundane layer, here's the esoteric layer. With the layouts in action, here's the technicality of it. So I go into, okay, this is what's going on in this reading. I give examples. We do readings. Okay, let's have a look at it. It says this. Esoterically, it says that. And this is what's going on. Technically, this is how these different positions and cards interrelate with each other so that people can start to learn magical patterning. You don't read them by going, right, I'm going to learn magical patterning and I'm going to read this little bit and that will teach me. It doesn't work like that. You read it, you go away and you think, what the fuck was that about? And then as you're then reading and you're doing the readings, okay, it's almost like a feeling. You start to make the connections. Those are triggers. Those are little catalysts for magicians to play with. I wouldn't change the positions of the layouts. I wouldn't add to them because they're sealed units, so to speak. I mean, you can actually use the mundane layouts for deep magical readings, but you can't use the deeper esoteric layouts for mundane readings. It'll just tell you to fuck off.
One of the things you mentioned, Josephine, on page 136 in the book that really struck me as well is you say that, quote, parasites are the biggest problem of all in readings. Can you expand on this in terms of what is a parasite in the context of a tarot reading and how can people combat that?
Parasites are not something that most tarot readers are aware of. It tends to be a more magical and shamanic thing that people come across them. They're normal. This is the first thing. Everyone panics, like, oh my God, have I got a parasite? It's like, probably, just like you get a tick and you can get worms, and it's at that level, literally. It's just that you can't see them, and they tend to just feed off energy. So emotional energy, fear, sex, things like that. And when you have someone doing a reading, say their boyfriend's just walked out on them, they're in a mess, they've drunk 2 bottles of wine, smoked 20 cigarettes, and now they've got the tarot deck out. Doesn't he love me anymore? We've all been there. We've all been there at some point in our lives. You're in a big ball of emotion, which is like a huge steak and kidney pie for a northerner. Like, oh my God, food. So they'll come along and attach. And most of them don't cause too much problem and you can clean them off easily. Some that are intelligent can become a problem because they can figure out how to manipulate your body, not your energy, your body, to trigger more of an emotional cascade so that it becomes more and more severe, so they can feed more and more and more. And this is, people say, oh, that can't happen. Actually, it happens in your body all the time. Bacterial overgrowth in the bowel will trigger a whole series of cascades in the brain. If one of the bacteria or some of the bacteria get out of balance and they want feeding more than the others, they will tell you to go and eat sugar. Viruses can adapt your behavior. So, and think of them like viruses, because, it's the closest thing to a parasite, is it will get into you and it will adapt to you to make its own environment better so that it can survive. A virus doesn't want to kill you. It wants to live in you. It wants a house. And parasites are the same thing. They want a house and they want good food. Cat food. Great. You've got a cat. Right, it's moved in. When you're doing readings and emotions are involved, you become visible. Emotional energy is very bright, so you become very visible. If there's parasites around, which most readings happen in New Age stores, which tend to be quite heavily parasited, because people go there when they're desperate and when they're frightened and when they're curious, or they deep and dark, and they get the 19-year-old who wants to be deep and dark, so they've got the magic shop. So if it's not being kept clean, it can be a bit of a parasited place, and, one thing leads to another. Dead easy to deal with. Clean your deck, clean your hands, and when you're highly emotional, don't do the reading if you can't switch that emotion off and put it to one side. Wait until you've calmed down and then do the reading. It's actually a very good exercise for people. If you're doing your own readings, if you get a very strong emotional response to a reading, stop what you're doing. Step back. Where does that come from? What is that fear about? If it's said, oh, there's going to be a disaster and you're at the end of your rope and you can't take any more disasters, you've got two ways of dealing with it. You can go into an emotional wreck and do a shitload of readings and get completely gammed up and parasited and have to go clean yourself off. Or you can step back and go, that's interesting. This is a very powerful reading. It's showing even more disaster. I don't think I can take any more of that. I'm going to go away, have a cigarette, think about it, come back. I'm going to do a second reading without emotion. Do I need, for my evolution, do I need to go through that disaster? And if it says yes, then you stop reading and you step back and you prepare for whatever's coming. If it says no, you don't have to go through that disaster, then you can do a series of readings to look at how is it going to manifest, when is it going to manifest, how do I avoid it? And you do that by a series of very pertinent questions. Knowing your life as you do, you can have a rough idea of where your weak spots are. So you go through and write the questions down first and look at the questions, make sure that they're very tight, they've got a good short time on them, and that they're very precise and clear. And then you go through them one by one without emotion. If emotion kicks off, you look at what kicked it off. That will tell you where you're vulnerable to parasites. Everyone's got different vulnerabilities. Some people are immune to them. Some people don't have a problem with them. You get heavily parasited in your teens. Most people do. And then you get an inner immune system which sort of sloughs them off. And it's not until you start sticking your head into things like divination and magic where you're going to come across them again. But some people, if you're empathic like me, you're more vulnerable to them, so you have to be more careful. And some people are just downright immune. They just have no problem whatsoever with them. But your emotional reaction will tell you a little bit about where your vulnerabilities are. And that's where you have your work to do. And that means putting emotion to one side while you do the readings. And just keep clean, and if you've done a series of readings that were disastrous or bad, you should go get a ritual bath afterwards, clean up. Wash your hands with salt, and I get liquid soap and pour just ordinary table salt. People go, oh, should I use Celtic salt or pink Himalayan salt? Salt is just salt, that's what it does, it strips. Put table salt in your hand, and I always get it by, a 6 kilo box. I get huge amounts of salt because I go through it. A handful of salt, liquid soap, give your hands a really good wash, shake the salt in your deck, you're done. And if you find that even then it's following you around, you still have a weird nagging, come back and do more readings, come back and do more readings, your deck's parasited, you're parasited. Don't do any readings for about a month. That will starve it out. It's like worms. Starve them out. You know, if you don't have a chemical shitstorm to get rid of something, you starve it out. And that's the best way to deal with them. But it isn't a panic station, oh, I need an exorcist, or oh, I need this, that, and the other. It's something you can deal with yourself, and something to be aware of that is part of everyday life. And if you live somewhere like me, I live out in as close to wilderness as you can get in in England. It's very clean here. There's not very many people. It's incredibly clean. I go into the city and I literally feel like I'm walking through sewage. I feel absolutely filthy when I get home because that's what cities are like. And so I'll literally clean off again. But if you're living in that all the time, you adapt to it. You just don't realise. So, you know, but the emotion is always the big thing with parasites. First symptom is emotions that are getting out of control. It's either your hormones, you're either premenstrual, or, you know, your emotional swings are getting too much, that's normal for you, or if it's coming out the blue and you're thinking, oh, I need to do loads of readings, then you've got a parasite. So just starve it.
Josephine, this actually ties in this listener question directly to what you're saying, which is from Derek Jones, who's asking, I seem to remember Josephine mentioning somewhere that you can use certain tarot decks for diagnosing spiritual illness. Can Josephine share a little bit more about this? Derek says, I have never used tarot for that type of divination. And Derek's saying, how did you, Josephine, begin recognizing possession, for example, through tarot?
To be clear, actual possession is incredibly rare. Really, really, really rare. What most people think is possession isn't. It's either mental illness or it's parasitical. There's all sorts of different stuff there is. It wasn't a matter of discovering. It was a matter of I need information. And the Rider-Waite form of tarot, which most tarot decks are taken from, is just way too limited for that. With that sort of work, the first deck I started to use to look at that sort of thing was the Dream Power Tarot. That was back in the early 90s. And that was helpful. But then it became too limited. So I made my own deck. If you're a magician, and whatever you're into, be it healing, exorcism, whatever, it's an incredibly useful training exercise to make your own deck. You have no limitations. You're starting literally from the beginning of creation. How many cards do you need? Well, find out. There's no rule that says they have to be this amount or that amount. What you need is, what information do I need? What types of beings do I need? What type of physical reactions? What type of events, accidents, things like that. So what I would do is get card, cut it up. I'd cut up about 150 pieces of card so that I'd have as many as I needed. And I would list a load of beings. I would list a load of situations. I would list a load of physical interactions, all these different things, all the information that I would need. What would be the vocabulary that I'd need? And it'd keep changing. It'd keep changing as I refined it. And then I would just put a single word on each card. And I'd use colour for different words, you know, bad ones, red, things like that, so that the colour would start to connect in my brain. It's building patterns. You're starting building patterns of colour. And I would start using it, and by using it, I'd learn what limitations it had. Well, I need this answer, but there isn't a vocabulary within this deck to tell me that. So I'd make a note and make a card for that, add it in. And it can take 6 months, it's a process. But by doing that, not only do you learn how to put your own deck together, it makes you look at these situations a lot more closely. You know, when you're being called as an exorcist for whatever reason, and there's lots of very wide reasons, it makes you look in minute detail of how do these situations happen, what is going on, what is the way you need to move forward, what are the protections you need, how does the timeline work, what worlds is this, how many worlds is this operating through, what deities are involved, what land beings are involved. And so you end up with a very tight deck that is unique to you, that you use for that particular reason. And by doing that, you will train yourself in so many different ways.
And that goes directly to a listener question we have from Jeff Smith, who's saying, I've read that there are certain decks that beginners should stay away from. Does Josephine have any similar suggestions for beginners on what is suitable and what is not in terms of a specific deck?
To be honest, I have no idea. It's like people get drawn to decks for different reasons. And there is as much to learn from getting drawn to the wrong deck as there is to getting drawn to the right deck. There's too much avoidance that happens these days in Magic. Yes, there's certain things like, don't get your head chopped off, don't walk in front of a truck, common sense stuff. But in terms of making mistakes and picking the wrong things and doing the wrong ritual and calling this demon and all that sort of crap it's stupid, but you learn so much if that's the best way that you can learn. And in terms of tarot decks, it's like, whatever you're drawn to, go to whatever you're drawn to. But, don't buy because something is pretty. That's not the reason, because it's pretty. Does it connect with you at a deeper level? Because then you can start to build a vocabulary. In terms of magical training, I always say the Rider-Waite, just because it's boring, everyone hates it. And it's good for students to be bored and for them to hate it. And for them to get a good vocabulary in Hermetics from it. You get some, and they've got Hebrew on them, they've got alchemical stuff, and they've literally the kitchen sink thrown at them, which is not really that useful. For a beginner, I would say look at a simple deck. Start simple. Because a lot of the people who make, not everyone, and I'm not slagging anyone off, but you see some decks with, it has the Hebrew, it has the Greek, it has the alchemical, it has this. They have no fucking idea what it's about. The people who put them together, it's just they've Googled this, they've looked that up, it says this in that book. They've done their this, that, and the other. But you say, right, why is that relevant there? Why? Why is the bet on that card? Tell me why. They can't tell you. It's that it looks good and it sells, and that's fine. If they were doing a deck because they want to market it, that's fine. For a student, you want simple and you want to build up from simple. So it's like, don't give your 2-year-old a car. Give him a little toy car that he can sit in and paddle with his legs. And then you get him onto a bike and tri-bike and do it that way. Think about it that way. If you're serious about wanting to learn divination to see the work into the future, do it properly, which means simple, to the point, clear. And then when you find it's too limited, that's the time to then look for something else. And you'll find that you cross paths with them in the weirdest ways. It's like when I got my first deck, I'd got the idea, right, I want a tarot deck. I lived in Bradford, which was actually a very magical city. I just didn't know. There wasn't a magical shop. There was no New Age shop. There was nothing like that at all. You had to go to Leeds, which was like going to the end of the universe in those days. So I never went to Leeds. It was just too scary. But I was walking through, of all places, department store, the posh department store in town where all the ladies in the 1970s and 60s went to get their perfumes and their stockings and their this, that and the other. And what I used to do before I went to school is I'd go through the department store and get a spray of perfume because I couldn't afford perfume. But I was in love with someone who used to get on the same bus. So I wanted to smell nice of expensive perfume. So go through the department store, get a spray of perfume. And there was a tarot deck for sale, and it was just one. There was a series of cookbooks and flower arranging, and they're a fucking tarot deck. So it's like, and I just had enough money in my pocket to get it. So I got it. And that's how it works. It's just in the weirdest way the right deck will find you. It went to school with me stinking of perfume. And you know what you're like at 14. I must have stunk the bus out. It was so strong. And I thought I was the bee's fucking knees, So, yeah, they find you. They find you in the weirdest ways.
You might have just answered this question too, Josephine, but it is another question from Jeff Smith, who's asking, what is Josephine's favorite tarot deck?
I don't have one. As in, I don't have a favorite tarot deck. Again, it's like saying, what's your favorite chainsaw? I use the Quarrier deck. because I made it, and Stuart and Cassie painted it, and we put it together. But it works in the right way, magically, because I do magical readings, so it works perfectly for me, so just use that. Most of the other decks have been self-made that I've used, besides the Rider-Waite deck. And I had an Italian. The first one was actually, obviously it's based on the Rider-Waite, but it was an Italian version. It was a little one, so my little young hands could use them. I'm not one of these people that goes around buying decks and having favourites. It's a tool. It's like you only need one chainsaw. Why would you collect 6 chainsaws? Because they're all in different colours. It's a tool.
That actually goes to a question from Kevin Carlo. Kevin is asking, how does Josephine feel about using regular old playing cards for divination?
Oh, always. I've done that for you. Whenever I'm somewhere and I need to do a reading and I don't have a deck with me, I'll grab a playing cards. Dead easy. It's the minor cards, basically. That's what the minor cards are based on, playing cards, just with the imagery from various different woodcuts. But the actual structure is playing cards. Yeah, I've done that a lot. And somebody actually once challenged me to do a reading with playing cards. It was in the back of a car going at 60 miles an hour down one of the most dangerous roads in America with a group of half-drunk American Indians. And he said, oh, no, you can't do that. And I was like, yeah, I can. He said, right, here's a playing deck. Do me a reading. And I just on my lap, I had this book. So I put the book on my lap and I did a quick reading. And I just said, tell me about what's going on in his life. And he was married, and I said, you're fucking someone, aren't you, you dirty little shit? And the colour just totally drained from his face. Because he was having an affair with somebody, and that's the first thing that had come out in the reading was he's screwing someone. And that completely freaked him out and shut him up. So, but yeah, always, if I can't get a tarot deck in its emergency, I'll just use playing cards. Because it's the four tools. It's the swords, shield, cup. It's the whole thing. So,
Josephine, as well, we do have a listener question from Bill Good, and Bill says, I bought the Kindle version of the book, and I was happy to see that Josephine does not use reversals or cutting the deck. Timing was impeccable, as I was starting to doubt reversals as I was running well over 60% in my daily readings. Bill's question is, are there any other superstitions or accepted practices in tarot that are unnecessary or even detrimental to having a sound reading?
I'm not aware of a lot of these sort of isms that people get into with tarot, because a lot of them have come up in the last 20 years or so, and I'm just not aware of a lot of those. I mean, I've come across stuff like, oh, they must be wrapped in silk. Bollocks, You can put them in a paper bag. It really doesn't matter. It's keeping them clean. I don't know. I mean, you might know more isms than I do, but really, with a deck, it's just keep it clean. And in terms of the actual reading, reversals are a total waste of time, really. Reversals are useful when you've got bad layouts or you don't have a layout. But with good layouts, the good layouts will give you the negative positioning that you need, which then frees up the deck to actually speak properly. And reversals just end up complicating things. I've never found them useful. I stopped using them in the first 10 years of reading because it just was basically crap.
We do have a listener question, Josephine, from Trace Henry, who's asking, the Quaria apprentice lessons require the use of the Rider-Waite-Smith deck. However, while obviously foundational, the deck is frequently criticized for its non-inclusive imagery. And so Trace is asking, as Western society grapples with its inherent racism, can you talk about tarot imagery and inclusivity and that relationship?
Well, yeah, I mean, the Rider-Waite isn't inclusive because it wasn't an inclusive society. Late 1800s, early 1900s, in that group of people, they were all white. I mean, the fact that Pixie was actually involved in it was a miracle. Look, the Golden Dawn was moving very much into inclusivity with women, which was a major step forward at the time. But you're talking about a very white middle-class English society. So having women in the deck was about as inclusive as they were going to get. But these days there's no excuse for that. We're a very mixed society. We're a very international society. And there is no reason on God's earth why any deck that's made today, in today's world, should not include all factors of humanity, because that's what you're looking at, is all factors of humanity. It just blows me away that even today it's all still very white middle-class imagery. And also what really fucks me off, because I'm a woman, is that the women are always like simpering and tight waist and, you know, big boobs, and the men are all rippling muscles. How many fucking people do you know that look like that? Come on. It's like, where are the fat bald men? You know, where are the fat hairy women? Come on, dudes. Where's the black people? Where's the Asian people? Where's the disabled people? Where's the one guy with one leg? You know, where's the gay couple? What the fuck? Really? Get your shit together, you guys. You know, that there is no excuse, basically.
Especially, exactly, if today someone's designing a new deck or looking at other ways to include symbolism, it's just such an important thing to always keep in mind. It's amazing to me why people don't keep that in mind.
Yeah, because, I mean, when you're using a tarot deck, you're looking at humanity. Mm-hmm. You know, you're not a single unit in a sealed environment. You live out in the world. And if you want the deck to talk properly to you, and the various contacts that you work with when doing readings to talk with you properly, then you need to, you know, be a part of that world. If you're a white, racist, fascist twit, then have a white, racist, fascist deck, and you'll both be very happy together for the rest of your lives. But for the rest of human life that has gone past the age of 2, is like, yeah, there needs to be, it needs to upgrading. Why should it still look like it looked like 100 years ago? We've moved on with light bulbs. Why can't we move on with tarot decks, really?
Actually, Josephine, you mentioned a few minutes ago that you live in a very beautiful place, a natural place, pristine. And Jeff Smith is asking, in regards to what Josephine has said before on the chat with Environmental Magic, does Josephine view tarot as possibly a stepping stone to get people from city environments to be more based in their own intuition, as well as developing their own foresight before moving into nature? If this is the case, Jeff is asking, what more natural forms of divination would Josephine suggest when a person is able to finally get out of the concrete caves that modern humans find themselves living in?
I think there's various questions in that. I can't see a direct correlation between using tarot and learning to connect with nature. I don't quite get that one. But it will help you to get in touch with your own intuition. In terms of natural divination, which is very different. You see, natural divination is basically what oracles were until we discovered vocabularies. There's lots of different vocabularies, but until then, people looked for signs. And you can do that with nature. I do that with nature, and particularly when I can't use tarot. There's certain times when you'll find that magically you're depleted, your resources are down, your divination resources bottom out, so you do no readings for a year or two and let your resource pot fill back up. I rely on nature divination when I do that, if there's something that's critical. There's a situation, this was quite a few years ago, and I think I mentioned it in one of my books, where I bottomed out energetically through going through a very nasty divorce. I was at bottom floor energy-wise, so I couldn't do any tarot readings, but I had to make a very serious decision because it involved moving my children, and it was a big financial risk. And I'd gone out to Montana. There was something had come up in fate to go and look at this place in Montana, to go live there, to get the kids out of the city because it was so dangerous. So I was on this Greyhound, and I was, I had two and a half days sat on a Greyhound thinking, what the fuck, is this the right thing to do? Because they were literally in the middle of nowhere as teenagers. And we stopped off for an hour at this Greasy Spoon. So I grabbed something to eat and went out the back, and there was a big field. And this was in North Dakota. So I sat out in the field, and I really didn't know what to do, and I thought, right, universe. So I just spoke out to the field and said, right, you guys, I can't use a tarot deck. This is a really important question. I need some direction because I'm flailing around in the wind here. And this is Indian land. This is American Indian land. So, right, you guys, come on. You're Indians. You're spirits. Get to it. What the fuck do I need to know? Because this is a life or death question. It could be for my kids. And I sat there and I'm watching. And, because at this time I had no connection with American Indian society at that time. So the only thing I knew was movies. So I'm looking for the eagles and I'm, looking for the wolf and this, that and the other. And I looked down and there was a spider. There was quite a big spider. And she was weaving her web. And suddenly I got really sucked into watching her. And it was this most beautiful web. It was absolutely perfect. And then I realised she couldn't see the web because she was spinning it. But she carried on regardless. She kept spinning and spinning and spinning and doing her job, just doing her job. And it was creating this beautiful thing. And that was the message. You can't see the bigger picture at this time. You're doing the right thing. Keep doing what you're doing. So we ended up moving to Montana, which was the best thing that could have happened for me and the kids.
Wow.
That's how natural divination works.
What are the 2 or 3, Josephine, big mistakes that new or even experienced tarot readers can always fall into? Or maybe 2 or 3 things that you're constantly having to talk to people about to avoid? And how can they avoid these things? What are 2 or 3 of the big things that you wish people would just not do when it comes to tarot?
The first thing is worst case scenario. It's like a doctor. When a doctor gets sick, the first thing they think is plague. And then they work backwards from there. When you're doing tarot readings, people panic when they see something bad. And they really panic and they go into total free fall. But if you look back at your life, you've had a series of bad things happen to you. Everyone has. And you survived them and you learned a lot by doing that and you got wiser. So that's the first thing is don't panic. The other one is don't keep asking the same question over and over and over again until you get the answer you want. Sometimes if it's a very critical question, you can look from different angles, 2 or 3 different ways. But if you're still getting the same answer, just back off and give it a rest. And don't get into emotional readings. If you're in an emotional state, don't do a reading because you get yourself in a mess. You get all parasited, you start having nightmares, and then you email Josephine going, oh, I'm getting all these nightmares and there's all these things happening and there's nothing I can do about it other than say, clean the fuck up. Just common sense. Use your common sense. When people get into something that's not, they haven't grown up with, it's very black and white. It's yes and no, it's good and bad. And then as you get deeper and deeper into a subject matter, you start understanding the grey areas and the complexities and this, that and the other. Go into tarot with that same understanding that you're only seeing the black and white because you don't understand the complexities as yet, but you keep working with it and you will. If you pay attention, you will gain more and more skills. And from there, you will start to really see the grey areas and complexities that don't then freak you out. It gives you... Tarot shouldn't freak you out. Tarot should give you a toolkit. Tarot should give you the little alarm warning to say that the freezer door's open. It should work at that level for you, and it's how you approach it is how it works for you. You approach it with a state of panic and neediness and emotion, you're just going to get in a mess. If you can be disciplined enough to put your emotion to one side and say, well, this is actually an important question. This is a dangerous question. I really need to know about this. Is it safe for me to do X? Is it a danger to my life? If you're in that situation, you need to be disciplined enough to put your emotion to one side, put your fear to one side, look at it and take it from there. And you train up to that by not doing the same reading over and over again when you get an answer you don't like. Not panicking every time a bad card turns up, or doing the worst fucking possible thing you can do, which I've seen people say is, oh, I take all the bad cards out the deck. What the fuck are you getting a tarot deck for then? Really? It's like, dude, if you need to do that, go away and grow up. And then come back. And when you've grown up, then get a tarot deck and look at the nasty cards. And make friends with them. Good Lord.
I think you've used this analogy before, but it's kind of like the only way you can get a strong immune system is by being exposed to this stuff.
Yep. And if you want to be a strong magician, then you need to take the knocks. You know, you really need to go through life's experiences to learn, because that's where you get your skills from. It's like in Portland, Oregon, which when we talk later about social situations, in Portland, Oregon, you know, the men are going on the front line, the dads with leaf blowers. Why are they using leaf blowers? Because they're using tear gas. They can blow the tear gas back. Why did they know to bring the leaf blowers? Because they'd seen people using tear gas, the police using tear gas. They'd seen what it had done to their women, right? That's an experience. They've experienced it, so now they know what to do in preparation to go back. It's exactly the same in magic and tarot. You learn by having bad experiences. You learn to adapt, strengthen, change, evolve, and then come back stronger and more able to deal with stuff. Because then you don't keep getting the same shit over and over again, because you've dealt with it. You know how to deal with it. It's no longer a big deal.
I remember the first time that we were chatting, you brought up a point that it constantly, sometimes at the most random, seemingly random times, it pops into my head, which is there's a tendency, I think, for people to say, I can't practice tarot, I can't practice magic until I am completely 100% perfect and resolved in all areas of my life. And one of the beautiful, aside from that being completely impossible, one of the things you mentioned is, no, you have to accept where you are, embrace the scars that you carry with you, and go through. You can't sit around and wait for some impossible perfection, you know?
Yeah, no, and it's the same. I get students in Quarrier saying, oh, well, you know, I've stopped doing the practice because life is pretty hard with all of this going on, and I'm depressed and blah, blah, blah. This is the time to practice, and it's the time to learn what not to do. And it's happening with some of the students are saying, oh, I stopped doing tarot readings for the lessons. I don't know why. It just doesn't feel right. They've learned something. In a destructive time, there are certain times to stay quiet. Go off and practice something else within your magical work. But to just stop dead and wait until all the roses are out, you'll be sat there when you're 80, still waiting for the roses to come out. In terms of not doing magic until you're perfect, well, good luck with that one. I've yet to meet anyone that's got their shit together to that extent. It's like you grow in magic. That is what matures you, because you do magic, it speeds your fate up and it amplifies your fate, so you get hit more. If you push that hit away using magic, then it builds up and builds up and builds up and builds up until you really get slammed. So you learn really valuable lessons and you evolve. Or you can just sit there and look pretty in nice outfits with very magical books and just sit there and wait, and you'll still be sat there looking wonderful in all your robes and your wands and your swords, but you're not going to be of any fucking use to anyone.
For people who are listening to this right now, where can they get the book? Where can they pick up a copy?
It's on Amazon worldwide. It's on most internet retailers. And there's one in America that's just come out, and I think it's called Bookshop. And they're like an American alternative for Amazon, but they only operate within the US. But everything that's on Amazon in books is in there as well, and the money doesn't go to Amazon, it goes to them. But yeah, any internet retailer, your bookstore can order it in. If you have the ISBN number, the bookstore can order it in for you. That's it. That's where you'll find it, floating around. Out in the internet world land place thing, where all you young people go spend loads of money. It's out there.
Out in the very esoteric ether, some kind of...
Yeah. It's out there. Yeah.
In addition to all the tarot questions for you, we also have some non-tarot questions that tie into some of these themes. We have a listener question, Josephine, from Mahbubeh, who is a wonderful artist from Iran, who's asking, could Josephine please share about the importance of sound and vibration when working with spirits, whether chanting or singing? Just what is the importance of that vibratory power?
Sound is incredibly important. So is colour. It's vibration, it's pattern. It's what the universe is made up of. The whole thing is light, it's vibration, it's movement, it's sound. And uttering, from a magical perspective, is creation. You know, I'm talking magical creation now, not scientific creation, but from an inner magical creation. You start with the first utterance. And so the world is uttered into creation, and you copy that when you're creating in magic. It's uttering into a vessel. when you're working with beings, you can talk in your mind with beings, but to create change, you need to use the actual voice. So you can change a space by uttering, depending on what it is you're uttering. And if you're uttering a pattern that's been used for, a couple of 1,000 to 3,000 years, then it's going to be powerful, because each time it's used, it strengthens. Each time it uses, it strengthens. It's like there's only ever one utterance that keeps strengthening every time it's done. Whatever religion you are, whatever belief you are, this is how you get into people arguing over, mine's the right religion, no, mine's the right. Well, it works. Look, there's this miracle. It will work in any religion, because it's all the fucking same shit. It's just the human vocabulary is different. You get a Sufi going in and reciting in a building that's having problems. If that person is balanced, or as balanced as possible, and is true to their work, so the inner utterance can flow through them, through that sound, and embed itself in the walls of the building, it will change that building. If you get a corrupt person going in, or someone who's never used that utterance before, or has no connection with it, and utters it, unless it's been magically patterned in a particular way, it won't work. There are certain recitations that are magically patterned, so it doesn't matter. A toddler could recite them and it'd still work, because all they're doing is an on and off switch. Whereas when you're reciting and uttering to a being, to a space, regardless of what it is, it's a process of creation, not an on and off switch. Creation is a conversation between positive and negative, between substance and non-substance, between stillness and movement. By uttering in that way, conversing with a being, you're creating a pattern. It forms a new pattern that you can then build from, which is why you have to be slightly careful what you talk to. And from there you can build and build and build. And it's one of the foundation stones of magic is utterance. Another is vision. Another is movement. All of these things come together, and we recreate the universe by uttering. It's like if you look at a lot of the creation myths, you've got the Abrahamic creation myths, you look at the Egyptian creation myths, a lot of them start with sound. In the beginning was the word. In Egyptian, the first call of the Bennu bird. In the beginning was sound. When you're working as an adept and you're working with creation and destruction, it's the releasing of sound and the stopping of sound. And you work from that premise, everything sits on top of that. So yeah, she's tapped into the most powerful part of magic is sound. So yes, when you're talking to a being aware that your utterance is more than communication. You're not just communicating ideas. You're actually creating a pattern of connection that will build and that can become a vessel for something.
We have a listener question from Helena who's asking, I would like to thank Josephine for her relentless hard work and for her generosity by putting out there so many resources for practitioners. She's a treasure. And my question for Josephine, Helena says, is what are your thoughts on true vision and clairvoyance versus feeding our own fantasies? What do you recommend that can help us develop sharp discernment in magical and spiritual practice? And Helena says, as a follow-up to that, she says, I've meditated since I was a teenager. I found it to be of a huge help and a lifesaver in general. I also do banishing rituals when needed. I use divinatory tools like the tarot and astrology to double-check some facts. But are there any other techniques that you'd recommend? I would love your input on this and to learn more from you. You probably talk about it in your Magical Healing, but I haven't read it yet. And she also says, I'm taking my time to go through your excellent Quaria course. And she says, as someone with a natural tendency to walk through liminal spaces, attracting entities, and receiving an overwhelming amount of messages, that's all part of my daily life. Sometimes, she says, I struggle with this, and it's really hard to tell who to trust. So seeing clearly and finding truth has become a focal point in my life. So, Josephine...
short question. Yeah, right, okay. Well, actually, the first question covers it all, really. Yeah, practice. A lot of people coming into magic for the first time, when they first hit vision and seeing work, is they second guess themselves all the time, or they want proof. Both of those things will shut you down. And yet they're both logical, that you're just not going to go off in a fantasy realm. But you're having to train your mind in a way that it's not used to working. So you have to bear that in mind, that you're laying down pathways within the brain for it to be able to filter information. And that doesn't come overnight with a technique. It comes from practice. So visionary work, what you do is you treat everything as if it was real, unless it's really obviously not, like Mickey Mouse turns up, or, Rambo or something from a movie. Treat it as if it was real, so that your impulse reaction, it comes from a real place. Take note of everything. Every single little detail that is seen, you take note of, and you react passively as if it was real. Therefore, the pathways in the brain can start to connect, can start to grow. And then what happens as you're paying attention and treating it as real is that you start to very slowly discern what's real and what's coming from you. And it's a very slow transition, and it takes time, and it takes practice, and it takes discipline, and it takes paying attention. And you start to realize when you're working in vision and suddenly there are things that have appeared in front of you that you have absolutely no reference point for. You have no idea what it is. You have no idea why it's there or what it's doing. You've broken through into something. You've broken through into a connection. You write down all the details. They'll make absolutely no sense to you. And then 2 years, 3 years down the line, you'll realize what it was because of other magical work that you've done, or you've come across it in a book somewhere. People, when they discover visionary work, they start doing all sorts of stuff and going all over the place with their mind. That's no. Discipline. You really need to discipline and train yourself properly and go into inner areas that are well trodden because they're safe for a start off. Keep notes, treat everything as normal, and then more and more you'll find that 80% of it is real contact. So if you've been doing it for 5-6 years, you should expect about between 50 and 80% of it to be real contact, 20-30% of it to be you still. And that will happen for the rest of your life, except that you will know that that's you, because you will recognize the difference and you'll just move that to one side. It's like, no, I know why you're coming in here. No, you can fuck off. Right, I'm going over there and working over there. And that comes from practice. There is no quick techniques. There is no, get adept quick method. It's sheer practice, common sense, and boundaries in your work, in where you go, what you do, where you put your mind, and how you react to what you see. That's the other thing is, a being comes along and says, oh, you've got to go kill Mrs. So-and-so down the street. You're like, yeah, no, thanks. Next, move that one along. It's use the discernment that you have in everyday life. That's always a really good standby. If you wouldn't interact with that person, that being, or do that thing in real life, then don't do it in vision. Don't get into fantasy realm, and stay away from movies for a while if you're going to be doing a lot of intense visionary work. Just keep your mind clean.
And actually, Josephine, this leads into a question from Douglas of the What Magic Is This podcast. And Douglas is asking this. He says, one quick question that I'm being asked a lot these days goes a little bit something like this. What does one do if nothing is working magically? If one feels a bit hopeless with magic, and even though they've never seen the world in just a materialistic way, they seem confined to it. And so Douglas says, I'd be curious to know what Miss McCarthy has to say.
Well, with that sort of a question, it's really, really open-ended, because what sort of magic are they doing? Why are they doing it? How are they doing it? Is it that it's not working, or is it that they're not observing, or that it's not working how they thought it was going to work? There's so many variables within that it's actually incredibly difficult to give a straight answer. The thing is, there's lots and lots of different types of magic. There's lots of different systems of magic. And people go into magic with lots of different expectations. And so, they say, oh, okay, I've learned this ritual to get me a job, and I did it and I didn't get a job. So what do I do? And the thing is, to start with, is like, well, what were you doing magically? What was this ritual? Did you just do it? Are you experienced in magic? It's not like cooking bread, where you follow a recipe. And even when you follow a recipe, when you're making bread, it doesn't always turn out like bread. Sometimes it turns out like a brick, if I make it. So there's a lot of skill and experience that goes behind real magic if you're wanting it to work. So partly it's about expectations, knowledge of magic, and also whether the magic is the right fit for that person. If they've always been aware that there's more than the mundane, then it's very likely they've got some natural abilities, in which case they need to find the right system of magic that clicks for them. And they also have to think very maturely about why are they doing magic. If you want to get a job, smarten up, basically. Knock on doors until you get one. You could go on for days talking about this, but really it goes back to the listener's question. They have to ask themselves what they're doing, why are they doing it, how are they doing it. It's not that magic doesn't work, it's that what they're expecting and what they're doing isn't working. It's either not working at all or it's not working in the way that they expect. For example, somebody does some magical work to get a job, and they've got some natural ability so they can make it work, but they don't get a job. What they do is lose their job. Then they lose their house. Their wife divorces them, and they move across country, and then they get a job. That was the only way, because if they specifically said, I want a job doing this, earning that amount of money, the only way for the fate paths to open out that connect with that person is for them to be on the opposite side of the country and divorced. So there you go. Blah, 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 blah. Bang. That's how it works. It works within your own fate patterns, and it works within the fate patterns of everything that's around you. You are not an individual. You're not an isolated unit. You're connected in with everything else. So magic is used to bring things into focus, so that the lens is far more focused, that the power can flow down lines in a faster, more suitable way. And you have to understand that, so you have to know what to expect. And then there's the age-old wisdom that, you do magic to get a job, but you don't actually apply for fucking jobs, you're not going to get one. It's like, it has to manifest itself in some way, so you have to keep opening the doors until it flows through. One of the big problems in magic, not just does magic work, doesn't it work, blah, in everything, in expectations, in understanding, comes from Hollywood. People are educated through movies, through social media, through soap operas. That is their whole understanding of life that goes in at a deep subconscious level. And so they expect the world to work like that, like it's a cop show and we've got this DNA and we think it's the killer, and they take it to the lab and 10 minutes later the DNA results are back. It's like, what fucking lab are you working in? It's like three weeks later, maybe, if you're really lucky. And these are people, expectations are completely off the wall. And so the first thing that any magic needs is maturity. And it needs reality, and that comes from paying attention and going through shit which matures you, and then you can look at it and look at the complexity of it and work with that complexity. There's a thing on social media at the moment with these TikTok baby witches that were hexing the moon. It's like, for fuck's sake. And the whole witchcraft community is melting down over it, and they're all going nuts. It's like, do you not have anything better to think about? Really? Some silly little girls or silly little women have dressed up and hexed the moon. It's like, it's a big fucking lump of rock with its own power. You really think something is going to happen? Please? Just ignore them. Don't give them oxygen. Move along. They're there's no common sense. You need to have common sense and you need to have maturity. Yeah, that's sort of a roundabout way of like, tighten your question up, look at it in more complexity first.
We also have a listener question / comment from Kate Crane, who says, Josephine is a treasure and a gift, and I'm so excited for another podcast with her. I asked my dear friend Lonnie, who's also a huge Josephine fan, Aquaria student, and a Glitchbot listener, if he had a question I could submit. His reply was, quote, yeah, I've always wondered what I would ask Josephine, but I can always hear her in my head saying, oh, just shut up and do the work for fuck's sake. So Kate says, thank you for your generosity, Josephine. And I guess to tack that on to Kate's comment, can you share with us and just remind us, Josephine, about the importance of doing the work despite our own distractions and second guessing?
Yeah, just do the fucking work. It's like, it's really that simple. You know, you can read books till the cows come home. You can make plans. You can wait until life gets better before you start practicing. Well, you'll be dead by the time you get there. It's like, you want to do magic, do it. Make mistakes, blow yourself up. Take notes, pay attention, do the work. Magic is 90% practical work of doing. And then the rest is study, and the study is not magic. The study is everything else that's around you so that you can understand what it is you're doing, why you're doing it. I have this with Quarry students sometimes. Oh, well, you know, I've paused my studies because I need to wait for a better time. This is the time to be working. Occasionally, yes, and we can talk about this later in more depth, but, you know, we're currently in a very destructive situation. And from an inner perspective, those tides flow in and out. It's like a tsunami, you know, you don't get one, it just keeps coming in flows. And when there's a tide coming right in that's bringing destructive power, is you keep your head down. So the magical work stops, the readings stop, everything stops. And you become as mundane as possible while keeping still. It goes over the top of you as soon as it's gone over, then you come back out again. How do you know it's coming over? Well, if you do the fucking work, you would have the skills. It's very basic skills. It's some of the first things that Quarry students learn is how to spot things, how to recognize things. You spot it coming in, you double check it, you use divination. Okay, yeah, there's some destructive coming in. Should I shut down? Yes, you should shut down. Okay, you shut everything down. You wait till it goes over. And then you can pop out again. And it can be very local. It can be just in a particular area. It's not like everything all the time. So you learn to start observing what's happening around you. You observe the animals. You observe the weather. You know, you use divination. You keep an eye on things. But yes, you do it. You just do it. You know, meditation. People want, how can I be still? Meditate. Well, that's hard work. Oh, well, booty-hoo. Get on with it. Skills don't just drop out the air. They come when you practice. And it's really hard. And you sit down and your monkey brain is going nuts and your back hurts and the cat's shitting in the corner and the kids are banging on the door. And that's real life. And you have to learn to sit there, even if it's 5 minutes, and be quiet and be still. And you do that every day until it builds up and it builds up. And you start to gain inner muscle from it. And from that, you will also, sometimes you'll sit down and you've been doing really well for months, and then all of a sudden you can't focus and you've got, you know, an earworm going with a particular song that you absolutely hate from when you were 15 and things like that. That's an alarm. That's your brain telling you there's something going on. There's an inner thing happening. The recycling of songs in your head, there's lots of different reasons for them, lots of medical reasons for them, but there's also inner reasons, and one of them is protection. It's like your very early base protection, and you learn to recognize this because it happens. You write down earworm today when trying to meditate, and then 3 days later something happens and you feel the power out and your power goes back up and you can focus and you're nice and still. And you look at that event and then you look at the timing of the earworm. You've learned something. When you hear that, and then it's only for a day or two, and then there's a big event afterwards. Your energy was going out with that tide and working and doing something. So then you look at, how were you sleeping? How were people reacting around you that day? How were you reacting around people that day? So you're starting to build up a picture of your own physical and psychological reactions to power. And everyone's is slightly different, which is why it's very important to take notes. Every day you take notes of what's going on, because it teaches you by observation. And that way you also learn to observe things in detail, paying attention. You pay attention to things. You go back, you look. And so then the next time, 6 months ahead, you sit down to meditate and all of a sudden you can't meditate and there's this earworm going off again and you're fidgety and you're angry and this, that and the other. You know something destructive's coming in. So the first thing you do is you check your boundaries, you check your protections, you go get a ritual bath to make sure there's nothing stuck to you. And then you stay home rather than go out. If you can, you just stay home and you let it go over the top of you. And a couple of days later, all's well again. Basic survival instincts as a magician. It's like a toddler. A toddler learns by falling down, it learns what hurts, it learns what doesn't hurt. And these skills develop over time by doing, by observing, by learning from experience. That's how you learn magic. You don't learn magic by, fucking around during the good times, and then when the shit hits the fan, suddenly you're looking up rituals in books and I should do this. It's too late. You learn the skills in the good times, not the bad times.
To your point, there's so many people who say, during a waxing moon, a very, healthy, those are great for magic, but don't worry, if it's a waning moon, you can do all kinds of work with negative energies and this and that. And what I'm hearing you saying is, listen, when the tide comes in, don't try and, especially in times like this or any time, don't try and surf the waves of the tide coming over your head, and don't try and navigate magically to the fullest extent that you possibly can, because you're going to end up on the rocks. The tide is going to crash you down. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yeah, when you're talking about lunar stuff, that's every month. That's just normal everyday life. And you can use it, but again, from a magical perspective, it's minor stuff. The apprentices learn to work with things like that. It's very minor. When you're talking about periods of destruction, that is a different kettle of fish altogether. If you think you can ride an inner wave of destruction that brings war, pandemics, all of these sort of things, then you're an idiot, basically. You've to learn when to shut up and sit down and stay out the way. If there's a tsunami, do you go out and go, oh, yeah, I'm going to surf the tsunami? No, you're not. You're going to get as high as you can, as in physically high, not stoned out your brains. You're going to get up in the mountains and you're going to keep out the way. And again, you get this attitude from people when they've never experienced much. People that have had a very normal life, they've never had much bad happen to them, they've never really struggled, not really. And so they don't have any idea of real impact and hardship until it really hits them. When you've been through massive impact and hardship before, then there are times where you just get out the way and let it go past you. You really don't need to do that. But yeah, in these sorts of times particularly, you just keep your head down. You just shut up and get out the way.
We have a listener question as well, Josephine, from 4 and 10 and 22, who is saying, Josephine is always reminding people to do the work and keep their magical journals. Could you please share, Josephine, how this is so important at any time, but especially in 2020?
Oh, yeah. If you want to learn, the first thing you have to do is write things down. Take notes. It's like being a scientist. Every single step of the experiment, you have to log it. You have to write it down. And you are your own greatest teacher. And your powers of observation are your greatest teacher. So you write things down. You notice something, you write it down. And you notice things by paying attention. Are you aware of what the weather's doing, where it's going, where does it come from? Are you aware of what the birds are doing? Are you aware of how your animals around you are acting? What are your moods doing? I mean, you can get over the top and you can get to the point where you're sort of analysing everything all the time. And you have to learn to filter. By observing, you learn to filter out, oh yeah, I recognise what's happening there. Okay, yeah, I don't need to look at that. But then there's other stuff, like the earworms, like, you know, having bad dreams. It's interesting, we have on the street with our neighbours, we're all pretty close, we all talk to each other. And when a tide comes in, I can tell straight away that it's a tide without even having to do a reading, because everyone on the street has nightmares. They're all exhausted. They all want to eat themselves to death. You know, they all want to flop in front of the TV and do nothing. And then you do a reading, it's like, yep, tide's here. You just observe. And then when a death tide comes through and, you know, people around the village start dropping dead, you know, it'll take the old people out and things like that. You just pay attention. But your everyday stuff is observe. It teaches you who you are. How do you operate? It can also show you habits you didn't realise you had. And one of the most important things in magic is to know yourself. And you can get into deep philosophical and hermetic discussions about what knowing yourself actually means. But really, it's pretty basic. It's like, are you a dickhead? Do you have dickhead moments? Do you recognise that you have dickhead moments? Good. Well, then you're learning about yourself. Do you realise what it is that triggers your dickhead moments? Right, you've learned a little bit more about yourself. Why do those things trigger you in that way? And so you just start to pay attention to things like that. And you start to question, well, you know, is this me, or is it outer stuff? Is it inner stuff? You use divination, you use observation. You start to see that sometimes what you thought was your own dickheadness actually isn't. It's coming from something else. You know, if you picked up a parasite, are you under pressure from an inner tide? You know, is there magic building up that you've been working on and suddenly it's triggering? Because when you do, you know, magical project work, often it's long term. And a lot of people really don't realise that you don't just do the work and then it goes off and that's it. It will trigger and trigger and trigger and trigger. And every time it triggers, it will draw on your energy. There's some things that you think are your own response, but actually it's not always you. There's other things going on. And again, that teaches you by observation, by writing it down. And you think, oh, I'll never forget this. And the first thing you do is forget it. So you write it down. You know, I look in journals that I wrote 10, 15 years ago where I've completely forgotten about certain situations that are relevant to what's happening now. You know, the seeds were showing right back then. And, you know, I started picking up on it in 2012. But the seeds were much earlier. You know, I'm looking back to writing that I did in my journals in 2006, 2005. The seeds were already being planted then for what's happening now. And inner work that I was doing at that time keeps triggering now because it's all manifesting. It's, you know, the outer stuff is manifesting. And so the magic that I was doing at that time that's tied in with it is also triggering. You won't realise that if you don't pay attention and write it down and write things down. And it doesn't have to be epics. It's just a couple of lines like, you know, woke up feeling like the cat slept in my mouth and I can't focus and I've got a nursery rhyme going on in my head. My God, am I starting with dementia and blah. And then the following day you're fine. And then a neighbour drops dead. And it's like, oh, okay, that's what that was. That was the power coming in for that. And because I'm a magician, I'm tuned into a change in the pattern of my area. So, yeah, write everything down.
Especially in today's day and age with this kind of bombardment of social media, there tends to be a very performative aspect to sharing posts and organizing an altar perfectly before you can Instagram it and putting the right filter. Like I have this candle burning next to a statue of Michael. Do I use the red-orange filter or do I use more of the yellow filter? And yet one of the things that you're saying is, look, when you're writing a magical journal, be as honest and direct. This is for you. It's not for other people.
Well, this is back to the question of why you're doing magic. You know, and there's a lot of people, they do magic because it's an identity. because it's a community, because they want to be odd, things like that. You know, it always cracks me up when I see people putting photographs of their altars up, because a good magician, if you're actually working magically with that altar, any good magician can get into your work just by a photograph of your altar. It's that simple. You know, you're basically putting your phone number, your credit card number, and everything else up. From a magical perspective, it's all there, ready to be tapped into. And red candle, who the fuck cares? It's like, dude, really? Fuck off.
It's just like, focus on the work. And this ties into what you talk about a lot, Josephine, is letting go of the mirage of perfection. And to that point, we have a listener question from Trace Henry, who is asking and saying, students on a magical path sometimes struggle with self-defeating behaviors, for example, drinking too much and other things. As a magician, Josephine, who's been through it all, what advice do you have for those struggling today to stay focused on their practice? Not a problem I have, Trey says, and Trey says, asking for a friend.
Bless you, Trey. Yeah, there is no perfection. You know, it just doesn't exist. And there is nobody who has completely got their shit together. It doesn't exist. We are all a work in progress. And the older you get, it's just that as you get older, you see more and more of the bullshit and whatever. You know, if you're having difficulty staying focused, then you have to look at how are you running your life. Often there's a lot of pressure on people today. I was thinking about this, like with the COVID lockdown, is, you know, people are used to buying certain clothes and this, that, and the other to show off to other people how they present themselves to the outside world. Well, lockdown stopped all of that, which was interesting. You know, live your life as if only you could see you. That takes off a layer of stress for a start off. You know, and if that makes you not socially acceptable, I mean, obviously cover all your bits. When you go out, don't frighten the shit out of people by walking around naked, for example. But, you know, within the social acceptable norms is just be who you are. That takes a huge layer of stress and expense out of things. You know, if you're on social media a lot, do you need to be? Back off. If it's becoming a problem for you, back off. There's so much energy spent arguing with morons in social media. And, you know, look at how are you using it. I use it for friends and family. All my posts are locked down. So basically, I treat it like a virtual front room. I don't allow strangers to wander in and join in conversations. I don't allow people I don't know to come into my house. I use it for a very specific reason, to keep in touch with people. If you're having to drink or take drugs or anything like that, you know, there's nothing wrong with that unless it's causing you problems. If it's causing you problems and you need to back it up, then you need to ask, why am I doing that in the first place? Is it stress? Is it a compulsion? Are you needing to block things out? If that is so, and it's interfering with your magic, and you really want to be a magician, then you need to find other ways to allow that stress to out itself without dampening it down, which is much harder. And this is one of the things in magic, is the grindstone, or what I call the grindstone. It's power of Saturn, which is where you have to be pushed to your limit so that you know your limit. One of the biggest dangers in magic is people who don't know their own personal limits. And that's in everything in magic. And also in life. If you know your limitations, then you have a lot more power. You know what you can handle. You also know, more importantly, what you can't handle. And so the first layer of dealing with that level of stress where you need to drink or you need to take drugs is, what can I take out of my life? It might isolate me a bit more, or it might make life a bit more complicated, but will it be less stressful? If it's less stressful, yeah, well, then cut that out. It might be difficult and it might be an adjustment, but cut that out. It's like, for example, there's situations like I've just come through the other end of menopause. And going through menopause, it's often about 10 years for women. And it can do all sorts of weird shit to you. both physically, mentally, emotionally, magically. And one of the things it can do emotionally is that you become more frail at times. Pain can become stronger. Your emotions can bottom out. So it's like a depression. What's happening is the neurotransmitters in your body, because, you know, people think the ovaries just run your lady parts, your period, stuff like that. It doesn't. It runs everything. You know, you have androgens, you have all sorts that they squish out. And that keeps the whole hypothalamus, pituitary, thyroid, adrenals, everything is all tied in together. When those go askew, it buggers up your sleep patterns, your emotional patterns, your mental focus. It's hilarious when you get a group of menopausal women together to hold a conversation, because no one can remember the names and dates of anything. So the whole conversation goes like, oh, do you remember that thingy? Oh, that one down the what's it? Yeah, that one. You know, you just can't remember your vocabulary. It's terrifying. And you go through all these things and you realise it's your brain adapting. And, you know, in my case, my ovaries just bottomed out completely. You know, I struggled with that for 4 years before the doctors realised what had happened. It's as though I just didn't have ovaries. And so then I had to have replacement, which is not the same as HRT, but very similar. And suddenly my brain switched back on again. And where I thought I was getting depressed, I wasn't. It was just the hormones were all over the place. So also look at, you know, what's going on with your body. Is your body getting inflammation, for example? That, you know, chronic low-level inflammation can actually turn people to drink, you know. There's so many different reasons. So the first thing you do is you again, paying attention. Find out why there is that self-defeating behaviour. This is not sort of psychological therapy. As a magician, you need to be above and beyond. So you really need to be honest with yourself. If it's a compulsive behaviour and it's linked in with a psychiatric issue, then you really need to rethink how far into magic are you willing to go, because it's going to make it worse. And if going into magic is making a drink or drug situation worse, then back out the magic, because it's just not worth it. On top of, once all of that lot is dealt with, what's left is the need for discipline. If you can't discipline yourself to not overeat, to not overdrink, to not overtake drugs, when there's no good reason to do that, then that's impulse control. And if there's nothing psychiatrically wrong with the impulse control, it's just discipline, then you need to fucking discipline yourself. And it's very difficult and you will fall off the wagon. But the thing is, you fall off the wagon the day after, you get straight back on again. And you keep plugging away, and it's like stretching a long muscle. It takes a long time, but you slowly become stronger and stronger and stronger. And you can't ever let up. There is never a time when you will get there when you don't have to discipline yourself. It will always be some aspect of the struggle. And that makes you tough. And that prepares you for very deep magical work. And it also prepares you for death. And what comes after death is this very deep instilled discipline where you really need a drink. You really want to punch a hole in the wall. You really need to do this. But you think, right, I'm going to give myself 24 hours. Just 24 hours. Let's get through this next 24 hours. You get through that 24 hours. You're still here. You're still standing. Okay, let's try another 24 hours. 24 hours after that. Actually, I'm pretty good to go now. But then also realizing there'll be a day where, you know what, I can't make it 24 hours. Something is going on. I need to shut this down. I need to dampen this. I'm going to do this. I know it's going to damage me, but it's just now, this minute, and then tomorrow, back. So it's being elastic with it, learning to flow with it when it's really, really, really bad and you've reached your limit, you can't cope anymore, then you do what you need to do to get through. But when you can cope that little bit more, one more step in front of the other, that really strengthens you. So that when you're in the depths of power in magic and that temptation is coming in to play with that power that will destroy you, you have the discipline to say no. It's like all the men walking around are not rapists. They can see a very sexy woman, maybe naked on the beach. They don't run up and start screwing her because they have discipline. They have social norms. They stop themselves. It's exactly the same thing because you know you're going to go to fucking jail if you do that, you know, and it will be socially unacceptable. It's the same thing, is learn to grade what you need to do, what you don't need to do, what your limits are, what your limits are not. And the only way you will find your own limit with power is to push yourself one step in front of the other when you're really under pressure. Can I take another burden? Can I take another burden? Can I take another step? That's how I did Quarrier. I mean, you look at the size of the course, just in physical terms, done, you know, in just under 3 years. That was a huge amount of work. And the way you get through that, and it's all magically contacted work, so there was all the inner burden as well as the outer burden, and you do that by every day. Okay, one more step, one more step. Okay, I've done that, one more step. Until you realise you can do a lot more than you thought you could. And you can handle a lot more than you thought you could. And then you get to a point of, actually, that is my limit. I know if I go beyond that, I'm going to die. So that's my limit. As soon as you know your limit, you can then work really powerfully in magic, because nothing is going to push you off because you know your limit. You know to back off. When you're getting close to your limit, you back off, you back away. You don't stand in front of a being going, oh, I'm going to fuck with you, I'm going to kill you, I'm going to do this, I'm going to... you know that's going to hurt really badly. You know your limit. You just back off and say, dude, the floor is yours, get on with it.
So many people, I think, tend to look at someone who's very advanced, like yourself, for example, and say, well, once I get to Josephine's level and I have all these years of experience, then I'm good. You know, I don't need to look at any more magical journals. I don't need to really, I've passed through the Saturnine barrier, and now I'm at this state of just the entire world is an esoteric sandbox and I can build, you know what I mean? And it's like...
Yeah, no. No. What happens is that when you think you've got there, is the next layer opens up and you're back to the beginning and you're getting a much deeper octave of the same thing over and over and over again. It's just bottomless. You are constantly a student. You are constantly learning. You are constantly getting your ass kicked. You are constantly making mistakes. It's just you're making much more advanced mistakes where the stakes are much higher. So you really have to learn to pay attention and be careful.
Speaking of more advanced writings, I remember one of the first things we discussed was your Exorcist Handbook. And we have a question, Josephine, from Derek Jones, who's asking, in your Exorcist Handbook, Josephine, you mentioned that coffee will often keep away particular beings. Derek's saying, I believe I'm starting to understand the types of being that Josephine may be talking about, but I'm curious if she would be willing to elaborate on the types of energies that Josephine's referring to have the exorcist clinging to their lattes.
It's not that coffee keeps them away. It's that coffee brings in an energetic barrier, briefly. It physically does that as well. It's one of the things that coffee does is affects the blood-brain barrier just ever so slightly, but it helps maintain it, which is important as you get older. And it has a very similar inner aspect to it. And it's a very good antidote. It's almost like a universal antidote, it's coffee. When you're working as an exorcist, there's all sorts of different beings. And to try and classify them would get complicated because of the vocabulary. With someone who's not an occult exorcist, I can spend half an hour just explaining one category so that listeners would understand what I was talking about. But coffee is just one of the things. It will not save you from, powerful beings attacking you or anything like that. What it does is and I don't know the mechanism for this, from an inner perspective, what it seems to do is trigger a thicker skin very briefly, for want of a better word. Especially for people like me as an empath, when you take on a job as an exorcist, all of the problems start the minute you agree to do that work. So even if you're not going to do the work for 2 weeks, it's already started. And so you have to be very, very careful from that 2-week period right through until you finish the work. And bearing in mind, this is not Hollywood. So when you're working as an exorcist on a situation that is real, which, 97% of the ones are not real, when you actually find that small percentage that is and you have to work on it, you don't just turn up a couple of times and waft a ritual and throw stuff around and you're done. It's a process that can go on for months. And you're on the ground. It's not something you can do from a distance. So during that time, your energy, particularly as an empath, your energy is going to get challenged. Your boundaries are going to get challenged. You're at risk for the whole of that time. And there's certain things that the exorcists have learned through experience is a series of different things that you can do to maintain yourself. So look at it, not that it sort of rejects beings. What it does is maintain you a bit better. Coffee is one of them. Tobacco is another one of them. There's a series of different things that basically energetically seem to alter how your inner skin operates and makes it that little bit thicker and disappears you a little bit. So it's more about that. Yeah, most exorcists you'll find are quite heavy smokers and drink gallons of coffee and go stand in crowded, really bad sort of dollar stores every so often. If it's all getting too much, there's two things you can do if you need just half an hour's time out energetically to just get your breath. One is to go in a cave. Don't ask me why, but it works. You go in a cave and it's like it shuts everything out. And I discovered that by accident. I used to do caving when I was a teenager and didn't make the connection for the longest time until one day when I was in the middle of a 3-month very heavy work job. I took a friend to go visit some caves and realised as soon as I walked into the cave, everything just shut off and my energy just came rushing back in. So I spent a couple of hours in the cave and just regenerated. The other, which I discovered purely by accident, was going into a Walmart, which was very crowded with, Walmart, with every flavour of society you can possibly think of, which is horrifying. And it, again, same thing. It just shut everything off. It's like, the fuck? It was just like peace and quiet, and suddenly I had energy. The noise, the energetic noise of a load of people in a tight space who, of all the flavours of society that go into Walmart, it's like nothing else could get through. It was wonderful and it was the most bizarre experience. So I tested it and it does actually work.
Even the most advanced deity that you could possibly work with, if they see that you are inside a Walmart, they might just walk away from that.
Leave you to it. It's hilarious. I don't know how it works, but it certainly works.
That is a fantastic theme that I'm kind of picking up on, which is the grindstone, knowing yourself, knowing your limits. And to that point, we do have a question from Salem, who's saying, Salem here, hail Mother McCarthy. And Salem says, Josephine, I am so pleased to see you back on Glitch Bottle. I'm patiently, okay, not very patiently, awaiting the arrival of your new tarot book up here in the frozen tundra. In the meantime, if I may ask a question about another topic, and Salem is asking, would you, Josephine, ever consider writing a book exploring the depths of the relationships between Pluto and the threshing floor and Saturn and the grindstone?
Well, I hadn't thought about that, but actually, Salem, that's a good idea because there's so many different layers to it. And, it would be useful not just for magicians, but mystically, philosophically, socially. And it's not a new concept. This, the Greeks were talking about this. The Greek philosophers talked about it in depth. And it does seem to have been forgotten in the sort of the modern world of capitalism and, everyone's out for themselves and blah, 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 blah. And everyone needs a nice, comfortable, soft life. Everyone wants to make things easy, which is actually the worst thing you can do for a magician is have an easy life. People, when they first get into magic, they want an easy life. So they would want to use magic to get a job, get a girlfriend, get a flat, get this, get that, sort their problems out. And what it does is make you flabby, basically. If you imagine you sitting in a recliner and having slaves that bring you food, take your dirty plates away, wash your face for you, change your clothes for you, you never get out of the recliner, within a pretty short time you won't be able to walk. It's that simple. Whereas the person that goes running every morning or, does sports, athletics, building houses, whatever, hard physical labour, they're going to be really strong. Well, it's the same thing, the grindstone, the unraveller. This is learning about how to get strong through adversity. People, mainly in America, will go, oh, what's this with adversity and magic? Why is she saying that? It is really important, and fate loves adversity. That's how it works. You want a strong fate, you're going to have strong adversity. You want to be a really powerful magician, you are going to have adversaries. And the stronger you get, the stronger your adversaries are going to get, because it's a polarity. That's how polarity power works in nature and in magic. You can't become a powerful magician without an opposing power, and fate does that for you. The stronger you get, the more focused and stronger an adversary gets, and so you're constantly pitting yourself in some way or other against life events, against adversaries, against this and against that. And when you look back in history and you look at nations, often in history you'll find that the golden eras came out of severe adversary, these very, very difficult times. And we don't like that. We want soft, we want happy, we want pink, we want easy. And that's fine if you want a nice, simple, easy pink life. But if you want more than that, then you're going to have to get off of your recliner. So, yeah, I think, Salem, thank you. That is an idea that I hadn't thought of, and I will put that in the pending folder for maybe a future project.
I think this is someone that we bring up every time we chat, but to your point, Josephine, it's something that Jake Stratton Kent says a lot, which is you have to be willing to get your fingers burned. You have to burn your fingers and get dirty and get into it. Yeah, no, it is absolutely right. You don't learn magic by sort of tiptoeing around and being gentle and happy and free and full of light, and everything else is, put it this way, soldiers do not become hardened battle warriors in peacetime. You get hardened warriors through war. This is sort of, on the ground combat, not today's wars, which are everything but, when you're talking throughout history, on the ground combat, you get 20 men are sent to war for the first time. The ones that don't pay attention and the unlucky ones die. 2 or 3 come back. They've learned a lot of lessons. They've gotten hardened. They've gotten stronger. They go out again. The ones that pay attention, the ones that keep training, the ones that keep fighting, those are the ones that get stronger. They get more powerful. You end up with an elite force. Although these days, psychologically, they get absolutely screwed over. But you see the point of it's through doing over and over again and picking yourself back up. And like Jake says, get your hands dirty, roll your sleeves up, make mistakes, kick buckets over, and then you'll learn not to kick that bucket over again. We do have some listener questions from Anonymous. The first, Josephine, is, you've, Josephine, mentioned briefly in your works about how there are some deities that were once human. And Anonymous is asking, can deities incarnate on Earth like how some religions say, or were they average humans who became deities through some process? And how does this whole concept of deities that were once human fit in within the concept of subdivided deities?
Yeah, I think he's actually misunderstood what I was saying. What I was meaning is we have deified some humans, which is a totally different thing altogether. And it was something the Romans were really into. Again, it gets into very interesting stuff where you have someone who becomes a good magician or a good priest, or they're very wise, they're a good architect, whatever. Leonardo da Vinci, same idea. The guy was good at just about everything except finishing his paintings. In the ancient world, with someone with such skill, we would eventually start praying to him. I need to invent something. I'll talk to Leonardo. I'll ask him for help. I'll pray to him for help and blah. And then eventually he becomes a sort of god. He gets treated like a god. And then the Romans, took it that bit further and said, he is a god. That's how you also get Christianity coming out. You've got a very wise, knowledgeable man who, when you look very carefully at the Gospels and the Apocryphal Gospels and things like that, bearing in mind that these are copies of copies of copies that have been translated in various languages, when you look at the overview of what's going on, you're looking at what the Egyptians would call a justified one, a person who has gone through all of these, and it's actually some of the iconography of the justified one comes up in Christianity. You treat them as a god. It doesn't mean they are a god. It's different, totally different. So in terms of actual deities, then you have to question, well, what actually is a deity? A deity is an interface between a raw natural power and the human. And we create that deity to give us a telephone number or a window where we can commune with that power that's conscious. That's putting it as basic and simple as you can. You have a volcano. The volcano, from a magical perspective, can be conscious. It can have a consciousness, it can have a collective consciousness. But talking to a physical volcano is very difficult. You're focusing on the rock, but you want to talk to the consciousness of it. So what you do is you create an interface that looks a bit like a human, that has eyes and ears, that can see you and hear you. And then you enliven that image magically. And it becomes like a translator, a window, an interface, so that you and the volcano can sort of communicate. And sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But, over generations, it builds up a pattern. And the consciousness of the volcano and the consciousness of the human can both overlap in the pattern and communicate at a deep level. You find this in older cultures. You find it today even in some cultures, like in Indonesia, where, there's a long history of the volcanoes, of the mountains, being interfaced with by the king or by the shaman, of warnings, I am going to explode soon. What you're getting there is the power is shifting in that volcano. That shift is picked up on the pattern translates it through the deity window. You get the message, I am going to blow. See how it works? I mean, it's really basic and simple, but yes, that is a deity. So when you're talking about humans and deity, you're talking about humans who've deified a human. So we create a vessel, and that person, the consciousness of that person who's now dead, can either fill it, or a parasite, which happens, or another power, anything can walk in. So you've no idea really what it is that you're praying to or talking to.
In terms of the overlapping patterns and using the interface, I think that actually helps inform the second question we have from Anonymous, which is, you've mentioned, Josephine, before that deities across different cultures can have the same root power, but they manifest differently based on the land and culture, like Sekhmet versus Kali. And Anonymous is asking, if someone were to do Quaria on a land where they knew nothing about the land's ancient religions, would it be possible to run into the land's various deities and the names that they were once called by the land's people?
Using Quaria magic, it's actually in the training that they do that they learn to interconnect with the land powers and communicate with them and work with them and do long-term projects with them. In terms of names, no. Names are what humans give. The powers themselves don't have names, but we give them names. It's like your cat. My cat Colin wasn't born with the name Colin. He was named after a gay interior designer, because we had two male cats. We call them Colin and Justin after this couple of gay interior designers, like you do. So we named him Colin. But when I call Colin, he knows I'm calling him, not someone else. And he comes running. He's like a dog. So he now knows that that's my name for him. He doesn't have a name. Not everything needs to name itself. You know, animals recognize each other in lots of different ways. Smells, sight, all that type of thing. We're really into names. We name everything. In magic, it became a big deal in the sort of Greco-Roman, Greco-Egyptian period, that the naming was really, really, really important. And that in magic, if you didn't have the name, you couldn't do the work, which is bollocks, basically. Depending on what the name is attached to, it can make it easier. But it depends what that name is actually attached to. And when you're looking at Greco-Roman magic and the Greek magical papyri from Alexandria, you're looking at very low-level parasited magic. It's about the bottom of the barrel in terms of Egyptian magic. So you have no idea what the hell you are actually tapping into when you do that work, because, you know, you have a spirit or deity name, but you don't know what it's actually connected to because it wasn't used for long enough in the right way, and it was used for long enough in the wrong way. Whereas the power of the wind in Egypt, for example, is called Shu. And that was used for long enough, for 3,000 years, in a very sacred way, that the wind, the consciousness of the wind, when a human calls Shu, and they're tuned in, they're a magician and they're tuned in, and they call Shu, the consciousness of the wind will respond. And so you get people, you know, they get grimoires and it all has names in it, and they've done a bit of magic here and a bit of magic there, and they know a bit of this and a bit of that, and there's no discipline, there's no technique, really, there's no actual structure. And they have these, yes, but I have these sacred names and I'm going to utter them. Well, it's going to do something, but it's probably not going to do what you think it's going to do. One of the things that Quarrier students learn in depth first is to learn to work without the names, without the identities, without the front shop presentation. You learn very early on to connect with a power so that you learn to sense the power, so that you're learning, which is your deepest sense, that's how you recognize is the feel of something, not the name of something. You know, I could be sat here talking to you and I could call myself Hillary Clinton. How do you know I'm not Hillary Clinton? How do you know I'm not putting on a name? How do you know that Hillary Clinton doesn't have this hidden side of her that's, you know, she's schizophrenic and part of her personality is a British middle-aged magician? You've no idea. It's just because I tell you that. But people in America who know Hillary Clinton and have worked with her and spent time with her, and people who know me and have spent time with me, will be able to tell the difference between the two of us in lots of different ways. And it's back to, when you're asking these sort of questions, is first put that question into an everyday context in everyday life. Look at the answer that way first, and then transplant it back into magic.
Anyone who reads your books or delves into their own magical practice, the one thing that I pick up on all the time is esotericism and the occult. There are fingerprints of ambiguity, of hiddenness, of never pulling the veils enough to reveal the whole mystery. That's part of it, and that cannot be squeezed into a neat little 1893 magician's table.
Oh, yeah, it's a big fashion. It's a really big fashion. And that started, as far as I know, that started with Isaac Luria, who was organising Kabbalah, and he did this correspondence tables of the powers and everything. And people have copied ever since, basically, in magic. Everything has to have a colour, an hour, a day. It has to have a left foot, a right foot, red hair, blue hair, whatever. All these different correspondences, and people feel that it gives them power. They feel that knowledge is power, and they feel that these lists and correspondences is knowledge, and it's not. It's just information, and most of it is bullcrap anyway. There are fragments of truth in some of them. There are fragments of usefulness in some of them, but they are fragments. And these correspondence tables, you know, if somebody gave me a book of one of them, as a gift about 20 years ago, and I finally tossed it because never in 20 years did I ever open it even. I never needed it. It's like, the fuck? And it's also when people have run out of things to say in books, as if they're a writer, their last gasp is to do a book of correspondences because they know that it'll sell, it'll make money. It's just how life is. But yeah, this whole names, colours, hours, all of that, for the most part, about 90% of it is completely unnecessary. And about 10% of it is useful, but not necessary. I've talked about it before, actually, and talked in a conversation with Acker about this when we were online doing an interview. One of the most magical grimoires you can sit down with is the Arbatel. It has lots of different layers to it, and it has a gloss over the top. Its first layer is a glamour, which traps all the people who want correspondences and, off-the-shelf rituals and blah-de-blah names, and it's got all of that in it, and that keeps all of those busy. And you can learn a lot. It's not useless. That's a layer of learning. But there are lots of other different layers of learning. Some of them are dangerous, some of them are not dangerous, but there's all these different layers. And in the Arbatel, the author actually turns around and says, if you pay attention to his writing, these are the names of these spirits, but if you are a novice, or if you are of a certain persuasion, you don't need those names. Just call the spirit. Now, the first thing he's doing there is playing with people's egos, because the first thing that an idiot is going to do is see that and go, oh, a novice. Yeah, no, I'm not a novice. No, I'm a magician. Therefore, I need to ignore that advice. At that time when it was written, for about 200-year period, there was a lot of double writing that was going on in magical writing, in magical philosophy and esoteric writings. Is, if you really wanted to hide something, you tell people not to read it. You don't need to read this. If you're more than a beginner, don't bother with this. That's what you actually read. And stuff like, well, if you want more information, then go read this line of a poem. But this is where the magic is over here. No, you go and read that line of the poem. The line of that poem leads you to a piece of writing that gives you the key to go back and work on that piece of magic and unlock it. So even in the Arbatel, you don't need the names. You need to know the spirits. You need to know the spirits. The way you get to know the spirits is by doing the work, which means doing the training, gaining the skills so that you can discern. Very simple, really. It's just hard work. You can't buy magic in books, really. You can buy advice, you can buy pointers, you can buy information. But the rest of it comes from you actually doing it.
This ties into what you're talking about with the names and kind of having a name and defending things. The last question we have from Anonymous is, Anonymous says, this might be a more controversial question. There are many examples of prophets and mystics in the faiths of Abraham communicating with angels and other spirits. However, many of those same prophets and mystics are extremely hostile to the notion of other deities, sometimes also advocating or destroying those deities' temples. So Anonymous is asking, as an occultist who works with many deities, why or how, Josephine, do you think monotheism developed, and where does this hostility towards polytheism and idolatry come from?
Well, if I had the answer to why monotheism existed, then I would be a rich woman. Who knows? Really, you can look back in history and you can come to ideas, but who actually knows? Concepts of divinity and deity change all the time in history. Just read your history and come to your own conclusions. In terms of hostility with polytheism, again, that's history. It's not a new thing. It's always gone on. The new gods were taking over when the new people came in, when new ideas came in. Today, with the hostility, a lot of it is about ego and about being right. It's not about religion. It's my dad's bigger than your dad, and I'm more important than you. And I'm watching all this going on at the moment with the Hagia Sophia in Turkey. the Orthodox community is all up in arms because it's gone from being a museum back to being a mosque. And everyone's screaming and, oh, well, if it's not going to be a museum, it should be a church. And, well, it hasn't been a church for 500-600 years. And it's in a Muslim country and they're all going nuts about it. And I was reading through some of the comments of the report because I was reading the latest report that was coming out about it in Greece. Bear in mind that, 350,000 people turned up to pray at the Hagia Sophia last Friday. So this is not a whim, and it's a Muslim country, for God's sake, and it's been a Muslim country for hundreds of years. When I was reading the comments, there were people saying stuff like, well, it should be a church because that's the correct religion and blah, 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 blah. This is the basis of the whole problem. It's a sacred space. It's been a museum since the 1930s. It's now gone back to being a sacred space again, which it has been for most of its life. It's the same God that's been prayed to. The God of Islam, the God of Christianity. It's the same fucking God, for God's sake. And the way they're going about it, they're building a museum in the precinct very close to it. So the movable icons, which have been on a museum display for the last 70-odd years, have just been moved a few hundred feet to a museum. The mosaics, which everyone's screaming about, are going nowhere. They're still there. And all they do is curtain them for Friday prayers. And that's the end of that one. It's still open to the public. You can still go there. And now you can go there and pray if you want to. So, it's this whole pathetic, I am right and you are wrong. We are the conquerors. You are the oppressed. We've taken over your religion. You can't do this. We can do that. And monotheism, the Abrahamic religions of all of them, is the most vicious in its attitudes because it's very much about, we are right and you are wrong. We are the chosen people. You are not the chosen people, which is, again, nothing to do with religion and everything to do with humans being dicks, basically. So that's the answer to that one. That's where it comes from, is humans are dicks.
This kind of goes back to what you said 20 minutes ago, which is you need to question yourself. Am I a dick? Do I have dickish behavior? Can I check this? It's important. Yeah.
And everyone does have dickish behavior. It's the degree of dickish behavior that you allow yourself to go on with and not recognizing where that dickish behavior comes from. If you recognize where it comes from, that's 50% of the problem solved. And the rest of it comes from making an effort not to allow that to come out, and then it starts to transform. But yeah, if you're not aware of it, then you're just a dick. And unfortunately, there's a lot of those running around.
We have a listener question from Javier Alejos, who is asking and saying, hello, I wanted to first thank Josephine for giving me the confidence to get off of my comfortable, magical rocking chair where I've sat for many years and actually get some work done. And so Javier is also saying, Josephine's books are excellent resources. I love her no-nonsense attitude when it comes to magic and occultism. And Javier says, I have a question. On rare occasions when I pulled out the tarot cards for a friend or an acquaintance, I found myself experiencing a scent, a sensation, or an image that flashes in my mind. I don't count myself as a particularly good magician, tarot reader, or psychic, so my inclination is to first dismiss these things, but then later I tend to come to find that these impressions were somehow pertinent to the reading. So Javier is saying, can Josephine elucidate on this phenomenon and the proper way to handle or deal with that?
It's a perfectly natural and normal thing. It's just that we're not used to treating it as natural and normal. What's happening is his inner senses are waking up. And sense of smell, sense of touch, hearing, flash vision, things like that. This is all inner senses, which, as a student, you have to learn to train. There's natural ability, and then there's harnessing that natural ability to make it work for you, which is like in dance. You can be a natural dancer, but you still need training. If you want to be a professional, you've got to train. The sense of smell thing is because everyone thinks that, if you're psychic, which majority of people are to a degree, This is not a rare thing. It's just that you don't recognize it. That everything, it's like I have an experience of my grandmother. People in their heads think, oh, well, she saw her grandmother in full dress and had a full conversation with her and blah, blah, blah. It doesn't work like that. It snatches. And I get the same thing with scent. It's like if there's a dead person. My house, there's a hallway that runs through the house. And it's the only place that I leave unsealed so that, if the spirit needs help, they can get into my house. I can smell them. It's the first thing that I notice. I smell them. And it's just one little area in the hallway where there's a sanctuary for people in need, dead people in need. Living people, you can all fuck off. You can't come in. Dead people in need, there's a sanctuary place for them. And that's the first thing I'll do. I'll be going into the kitchen, I'll smell them. So I know there's somebody there. So then I can back up and either go in vision and have a look, or I can do reading, which gives me more information. Because going in and looking, you don't see like the full person, their clothing, their this, that. It doesn't work like that. What I'll see is, are they fragmented or are they complete? Which tells me if they're newly dead or later dead. Are they projecting an image, which means they've been dead a long time and they've figured out how to project. So I can get that sort of information. This is why divination is so important for a magician. With a good vocabulary, I can then do divination to look at, okay, what's happening here? Who are they? Where have they come from? What do they need? Where do they need to go? Get all of that information. That saves me days and days of filtering through. Do I need this? Do I need that? I just get the information, do it, boof, they're out. Or in some cases, they're not. In which case, then I have to sit there with them smelling in the hallway for another week or two. If he's doing Quarrier, the exercise, it's actually in the very first module, without people realizing, is there are exercises in there which develop these skills very slowly. This is why, when I say, do these exercises a repeated length of time, do these other exercises for the rest of your working life. These are maintenance exercises. And you choose whether you want to do them, but that's your maintenance exercise. And what they do is develop these inner senses. And I made a point of not giving a shopping list to these exercises. Marketing, if you do this exercise, you will gain white teeth, long hair, rippling muscles, blah, 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 blah. Because that's how people have become programmed to choose whether they're going to do something or not. So I made a conscious decision in Quarrier to not have anything like that in it at all. And that people will either use their maturity of that when a mature and experienced magician says to them, it would be a good idea to do this 10 minutes a day for the rest of your life. If they don't have the maturity to see and understand what I'm saying, then they can fuck off. Or they can struggle until they do get the maturity to realize, oh, actually, no, that would have been a good idea. I'll start now. And so all those exercises are in there for very specific reasons. And some of them are to develop these sorts of skills. And what I would say to him is, besides doing the basic exercises, is write it down. When he's doing a reading, if he gets a certain smell, a certain flash vision, even if he can only hold one fragment detail, write it down. And write the reading down at the side of it and the question that was asked and the layout that was used. So he can go back to it and he can start to then see at what point does the smell happen or the flash instinct happen. At what point in the reading? Is it when he's shuffling? Is it when he lays it out? Is it when a particular position is hit? So he'll start to see, and by doing that, it'll make him think. It'll make him observe, which in turn trains the natural ability to, oh, well, actually, you keep focusing on the last card, which is the answer card. And you're asking me if I get that smell or flash vision at that point, maybe that's when I should deliver. It takes a long time, but you can actually train yourself to the last card, for example. If it's going to hit with a flash instinct, it will hit then. I get it when I shuffle. I get the answer. If I'm going to get a flash vision, if there's something strong in fate that needs to come through or needs to be said, I'll get it as I'm shuffling. But it's really weird. You still need to lay the cards out, because then it unpacks the whole thing. Learn discipline, learn observation, pay attention. He doesn't need to learn to handle it. He needs to learn how to train it. And it will take him 10, 15 years. But it is worth it. It really is, because it seems a long time when you're young, but actually get to my age and it gets really fast. It's worth it. It really is.
We do have a listener question from Javier as well, who's asking, as our world is currently being gripped by the novel coronavirus COVID-19 pandemic, what are Josephine's thoughts on utilizing magic for protection of home and family, in addition to social distancing and all that it implies?
Well, to answer his question, it needs another question of, you need to question yourself of, what are you protecting yourself against? Which is a very long question then in magic. If you're looking at it from a physical point of view, you are protecting yourself against droplet infection, against airborne infection. So that's very simple, straightforward. There are lots of doctors and epidemiologists who can answer those questions. I'm not one of those people. I know what I do. I'm very, very careful. My mother worked in infectious disease. My daughter's a medical biology researcher. There's a lot of doctors in our family in generations. And I grew up in an age and area of infectious disease. So, a lot of it is just basic common sense that I grew up with. In magical terms, it's what is actually happening. If someone says to me, how can I protect myself magically from COVID-19? The first thing you have to do is, what are you protecting yourself against and why? It's not like it's a man that's running around squirting something into your face that it's a one individual thing. From a magical perspective, this has been going on for a long time. COVID-19 is a symptom of a much bigger problem. And it is just one of a series of symptoms. And it's like the joke on Facebook of, 2020. Okay, what's going to come in July? Is it locusts? Is it aliens? Because it's been like one thing after another, after another, after another. And COVID-19 is a symptom of a destructive tide. This destructive tide, I've been talking, and I'm not the only magician by any means that's been talking about this. For the last 8 years, this has been building up. This is not new, and this is not new in our history. This is how the world operates, is you have creative tides that come in and flow out. You have destructive tides that come in and flow out. That's part of creation. It's part of nature. It's how it works. When you look historically, you'll see the rise and fall of nations. When you look at the spectacular rise and fall of nations, if you look closely and pay attention, you will also see that often on the bottom end of the decline, which finally finished off a civilization, you also have climate problems, you have earthquakes, you have plagues, you have war, you have everything going on. And it's often a knock-on effect. Famine, if you have a disease. If you have famine, you're more liable for disease. There's not enough food, that brings a war. Why did all of that start in the first place? Well, there was a climate shift, or there was this huge volcanic eruption that brought a volcanic winter. So therefore the crops didn't grow, so we had famine, so we got sick, and then we fought over things and our civilization collapsed. It's a knock-on effect. When you look at those in history and look at them using divination, which is another good thing to use divination to look at, from an inner perspective, what was happening. And what you'll see is a destructive tide coming in, gathering up and breaking up all of the crap, harvesting everything, thrashing everything, and then what's left are the new seeds that are planted, and then a new civilization grows. People today, we've had, probably for the first time in our history, decades of good health, of peace. People go, yeah, but what about this war, this war, this war? You're in America. What fucking war has been at your front door? For you, Alex, how many times have you seen a bomb go off? How many times have you seen a body blown up in front of you? Okay? So, for the majority, unless you live in Belfast or you live in Beirut, places like that, for the most part, the last few decades have been peaceful, prosperous, and healthy. We have antibiotics, we have antivirals, we have all these different medicines. People have grown up not realizing that that is not normal. In the length of history, this is not normal. And what we're actually getting now is normal. We've had a rise, we're having a crash. You go through the crash. The COVID-19 is part of that. And there'll be other things. And this is not short, this is not a year, because this is the inner tide. We started spotting it as a firestorm in around 2011, 2012. And what was happening was different magicians were doing inner work, going in vision into the inner desert and their version of the inner desert, and getting thrown out and getting told it was not safe, and seeing these huge firestorms. And it just kept happening. And then something would happen, we'd think, oh, it's that. It's safe now. But then we'd go in and it was still happening. And it's like, what the fuck? When I was seeing it, and then, we had the revolutions in the Near East. And we had the rise of ISIS, which I thought was hilarious, that it was ISIS, and ISIS with the colour black, the black ISIS, which is Nephthys, which is death. And I thought, oh, okay, oh no, it's that. But no, it kept coming. This fire tide kept coming. And then it started outing itself. And the pressure came off at the beginning of this year. So for that length of time of the build-up, there is no way what is happening now is going to settle down and be finished within a year. This is going to go on. Whatever it is going on for a long time, and it will manifest as disease, economic collapse, climate problems, land problems, all of these different things. Basically, normal service has been resumed. And in terms of people thinking like, oh my God, we're all going to die. Well, this is not Hollywood. We're all here in the 21st century. Our ancestors went through all sorts of stuff all happening at the same time. You learn to adapt. Some survive, some don't, but you adapt and you go forward. Now, as a magician, starting to ask now what you can do as a magician is too late. You learn your magical skills and techniques in the good times, and you apply them in the bad times. You don't fuck around and play at being Merlin or Aleister Crowley or anything like that in the good times, because then when the bad times happen, you find that what you've been working with and playing around with is of no use whatsoever. That's why Quarrier was written. It was written for its time. It has all of the skills within it for how do you look after your body? How do you look after your spirit? How do you look after the community around you? How do you defend? How do you attack? What do you do when this happens? What do you do when that happens? How do you spot things coming around the corner so that you can avoid them? All of those skills are there, ready. And all you can do now is start to learn some skills. It's like saying, oh, right, there's a really, really big war going and it's really bad, so I'm going to go off and be a soldier. Aren't you going to train first? Are you just going to put your jogging suit on? Like, how many pounds overweight are you? What's your lung capacity? How's your eyesight doing? What's your back strength like? Can you use a gun? Can you even hold a gun? Do you know how any of this stuff works? It's that mentality. Train. You train for war. You don't run into war and then train in the middle of war, because then you put everyone else at risk. Same with magic. You learn in the good times and you apply it in the bad times. And if you're already in the bad times now and you want to learn, then realize there's nothing useful that you can do magically other than learn the skills that you need to learn. And then back to don't be a dick. So, you were asking about what can we do in general to make society a better place. Don't be a dick. You start changing your environment and your nation by changing yourself first. Everyone always wants to outside of themselves. Well, I want to go save the starving in Africa. Oh, I want to go do this, that. And there's nothing wrong with that. But if you want to change the world, you start with one person at a time. You start with yourself. And then how you interact with other people. Do you protect it magically? If you have protection skills, do you protect your neighbour? Do you protect your neighbourhood? How far are you willing to stretch your energy out? Because it takes your own energy to do that. How much hard work are you willing to put in to keep your neighbourhood clean and balanced? Are you willing to put that amount of energy out to plant the scales in your neighbourhood, to trigger a fate pattern that will bring it slowly into balance over time? That will take a lot of hard work. It will hurt you. It will drain you. It will bruise you. Are you willing to do that for your neighbourhood? If you're not willing to do that for your neighbourhood, then you're not willing to change the world. So you should just shut up and go back in your recliner. But if you're willing to do that for your street first, or your house and the house next door, learn your skills, the very basic skills. Practice them on your home and the home next door. You're not imposing anything on the neighbourhood or the house next door. All you're doing is bringing in balance, bringing in tuning, keeping an eye out. There's very basic skills in the apprentice section, really simple stuff where you learn how to use guardians, how to work with guardians in lots of different simple ways. But you do that, and by doing that, you gain skills and you gain strength, and you start to learn your limitations. Like I look after my village. I don't look after any further than my village because I'm not strong enough and I'm not skilled enough. But I keep a very close eye on my village and a really close eye on what I do for my home to protect it, to keep it secure and to keep it clean. It's a semi-detached building, so I do it for both sides of the building. So I keep mine and my neighbour's house clean. I keep it defended. I keep it warned so that if anything is coming, a spirit will come and tell me. It will give me a warning. And if something is coming next door, it will treat next door's house like it treats my house, so it will come and tell me there's something coming. Or there's a tide lapping up in the village. It's getting close to the house. You need to do something to try and divert it a little bit. Because you can't stop it, but you can divert it. So I'll divert it around both houses. So doing that is what changes the world. There's stuff like the social movements, Black Lives Matter, things like that. These are all really, really, really important movements. And people that are not doing magic, this is an outer way of doing it, is they protest, they vote, they make their voices heard. Lots of different ways like that. As a magician, if you're really doing magic, your energy is going to be taken up holding the magic of doing the inner work to bring about the change. So you can't really do both. So I say quite a few times in the books is choose politics or choose magic. You can't do both. It's not that there's any law that says you can't do both. It's like energetically, if you try and do both, you're going to fail at both because you're not going to be able to stretch yourself. My teens and 20s were protests. I was out on every protest you could think of, even ones that I didn't even know what I was protesting about. I was 15 and it looked good. So I was there. But then as I got older, I started to realise that actually this is really important and I want to fight for this. As a magician now, I just work magically because that's where my energy goes. And you have to also understand that what is it you're trying to achieve? People say, oh, well, we want a peaceful world. There's no such fucking thing as a peaceful world. It just doesn't exist because it's full of morons, which are humans. Every human is a moron. I'm sorry, guys, but we're all morons at some level or other. And we bring in conflict in one way or another. You have to think about, what do you really want to do magically? What do you want to change? All you can do is bring balance. And you can't actually create balance. You can trigger it, but you never get there. But it's the getting there that brings the process of evolution. And it's the processes of evolution that bring maturity into a society. Through working with balance and working with the grindstone unraveler concept, you also start to understand that everything has its place and its function. And so, which in turn makes you more tolerant towards people of different races, peoples of different sexuality, people of different intellectual abilities, people of different jobs. Everyone plays their part. Everyone has something that they bring to the table. And nobody is better than the other person. We're all better at something than somebody else. But everyone has something that makes them unique, that they bring to the table as a human being. And it makes you a lot more tolerant. And within that tolerance, it then also teaches you not to be over-tolerant. This is another thing that I've been seeing. It's like the Disney realm. Again, it's back to Hollywood, is that what tolerance means is allowing people to do whatever they want all of the time, no matter how bad. That is not tolerance. That's passivity, which is different. I've noticed that there's a tolerance for fascism. There's a tolerance for extremism. And that no matter how badly a person behaves and how vicious and nasty they are, we have to love them and be tolerant of them. No, the fuck we don't. If you're tolerant to the cruel, you are cruel to the innocent. It's a very, very simple dynamic of learning where to draw a line. And learning where that line is comes from working with the struggle of trying to find balance. And the balance between constriction and release, which is Saturn and Pluto, at its very base level is constriction and release. Through working with those two powers, it magically changes you. It changes how your consciousness works. And so you begin to understand the complexities of fate, the complexities of life, the complexities of society, and you begin to realize that nobody knows how to run a society properly. We just don't. We try lots of different things, and some are better than the others, but we'll never quite get there. You'll never quite become the most powerful magician. You will never become a pure person. You will never become perfect. You will never become balanced. But the complexity of getting there takes you layer after layer after layer in depth, which changes you at such a deep level that it changes how you are as an ordinary individual in everyday life. So you learn to be tolerant of what needs to be tolerated, and you learn to be intolerant of what should never be tolerated. Just watching people talking when they're on social media from America, it's like, what the fucking century are you people in? You know, sometimes, black people this and black people that. It's like, have you not moved forward in any form of evolution at all in the last 200-300 years? And yet they will tolerate viciousness, nastiness, violence at the most horrific level. They'll tolerate that. They're normalized to it. But they won't tolerate an intelligent, educated, talented human being because of their skin color or their gender or their sexuality, because it offends them. It offends you? Well, fuck you. Be offended. And I'm finding as I'm getting older, I'm really learning to be intolerant of what needs to not be tolerated. I used to bend over backwards in my 20s and 30s to accommodate people who were dicks. And I've really learned through old age that that is actually not only not a good idea, it's a very unhealthy, magical idea. It's incredibly unbalanced, and it unbalances you at a deep magical level. And this is back to learning about yourself, learning to know yourself. What is it that makes you intolerant of this and tolerant of that? Everyone has something that they will tolerate that another person wouldn't. Everyone has something that they will not tolerate that other people do. What you do is step back quietly on your own and say, why? Why am I willing to tolerate that person? And it's interesting watching people thrash around with that question. There's a magician recently someone I've got a lot of respect for. He posed a question about something that was going around the witchcraft community, about a certain person within the witchcraft community who's a personality, big name personality, who is a complete and utter twat. He's ignorant, he's aggressive, he's rude. And I don't mean just in the use of language, that's cultural. He's nasty. He attacks people really badly. He tears into people that are weaker than him. He attacks people magically for the slightest little thing. He's a narcissist, basically, with a very, very fragile ego. And the magician that I respect was saying, why do people go on his podcast? Why do they be interviewed by him? Why do they do that? Can't they see? Are they so blind? And I was saying, no, they're not blind. They're greedy. It serves their purpose. They want to get their voice out to sell a book. So they are willing to swim in a sewer with a piece of shit so that they can sell a book. That is a level of tolerance that is incredibly selfish and incredibly stupid. It's about learning to recognize that. Is that if nobody gave that person airtime, that very bad person would no longer have a platform for spewing his hatred towards, different minorities and this, that, and the other. That platform wouldn't be there because nobody would be listening to him, because nobody would go on his show. And, it can go too far the other way of, this person, this personality or this writer or this publisher, they're doing this that's a little bit edgy. It's about common sense. When you're talking about encouraging people to kill other people because of their race or their colour or their sexuality, that's a no. And there should be no tolerance for that. You should be completely intolerant with that. That way you start to change the world. What is it you are willing to stand up for? What is it you're willing to protect? What is it you're willing to do without? Are you willing to do without those cheap clothes that you get, that you can afford, but make you look like you earn more than you do? Why don't you just, buy less clothes and pay the right amount of money to people so they have a living wage? That changes the world. Your buying power, your platforms. These are ways you can change the world as an outer person and also as a magician. And make sure you pay people their due. It's not fucking rocket science. It's just don't be a dick. And you will change the world. Because if you have lots of people who are working very hard to try not to be a dick, the world starts to change. And we're seeing that. You've seen the polarization. We're getting a lot of extreme right-wing sentiments coming up all around the world. It's not just in America, it's coming up all over the place, and it's coming up in different ways. And again, this has been spotted since around 2010, 2011. Acker and I were sat in Germany, in 2011, 2012, something like that, and I was talking about, as a magician, I was starting to see the seeds of fascism in Britain. It was very small seeds, but they were being planted, and I was seeing them. And everyone was saying, no, you're just paranoid. And it was like, no, actually, I've looked at this. I looked at it magically. It's a possibility. It's in the fate pattern. It's not a dead cert, but it's definitely an element that's there. And we're edging closer and closer and closer and closer. And now people are starting to see it, and they're starting to panic. Again, it's too late. From a magical perspective, you do that work, you plant the scales, and then you let them work, and you just keep supporting them for as long as they're going to work. And the other thing to also go away with this and think about is, what do you want as a better society? And everyone has these nice utopian ideas of a better society. And then you have to say, well, but you're a democracy. You can't have a democracy and a utopia, because the two don't go together. Because there's always going to be a certain section of the society that don't want that utopia. They want another utopia over there. And so that splits the vote. And then you've got a third set of people. They want a utopia over there, which is in a completely different utopia. And so the vote split again. Democracy is about compromise. It's about not getting what you want, but it is about keeping out the worst by using a vote. And one of the most magical things you can do is vote with intent. Vote with magical intent. Do the ritual work, do the visionary work, build up to it, build up to the vote, build up to the vote. And when they're building up to the vote and it's voting day, is you work. If you have the skills, if you don't already have the skills, then don't try it because you'll just fuck it up. If you have the skills, work on bringing balance and protection to the voting room that's the nearest to you, that's your neighbourhood. You protect that voting booth. You bring balance to it as much as possible. You hold the scales no matter how much they're swinging around. You have your energy holding those scales and it will knock you on your back. It will make you throw up. It will do all of these things to you if it's working. You hold them scales and you hold them hard. If you want to do magic, that's what you do. You don't do magic to get this person in. You don't do magic to get that person out. That's intersecting fate patterns. And it gets tangled and it gets really fucking messy really quickly. What you do is you look after your own quarter and think about what type of a world you want. Do you want a world where different groups of people can want different utopias and fight over it? If you do, then you want a democracy. Then you work for that. So you have to think very, very, very carefully about what you're doing magic for and what you want.
A fitting last question to that would be, as people think about what you're saying and really take it into consideration and marinate on it, where can they find more information? Can you talk about Quaria and where they can find you and just really anything else, either for learning more or any other information that you'd like them to know about?
Yeah, well, there's Quaria.com, which I'm sure you'll put the link up to. The first module, if you don't want to do Quaria training, if it's not for you, it's not for everyone. The first module, the first apprentice module, is there's lessons in there that will teach you how to get yourself ritually clean. A lot of people do ritual baths and don't know what they're doing. So they often, from a magical perspective, it's the difference between using soap and using bleach. There's a ritual bath in there that's like bleach. It will just strip things off of you. There are some things that you can learn reasonably quickly that you can apply at this time. One is how to keep yourself clean. One is how to talisman yourself, to protect yourself in a very simple but effective way that doesn't tangle your fate patterns. A lot of talisman work can get you into fate tangles if you don't know what you're doing. There's an exercise in there. What you would do is, if you go and look at it, you do it with the intent and you utter the intent into the directions of whatever I need to keep me safe at this time from severe danger. You don't want to wipe out everything. You need minor happenings. Never try and block yourself from getting ill. Sometimes a minor cold can actually protect you from a much more dangerous illness, for example. So you can learn to clean yourself, you can learn to talisman yourself. There's basic divination. Learn basic divination skills so you can keep an eye on what's going on. You know, learn basic astrological skills, because a lot of all of this is in the astrology. It's all there. You can actually look at the charts and go, what the fuck? Meditate, learn to get basic stillness. It's all there in the first module. So go to Quaria, look through the first module, look at some of the exercises. If you don't want to be a long-term student, just look at those exercises and do them. There are basic survival skills in there for this time. If you just go away with those, it will help you a lot. One of the things that happens when these very destructive tides come in is, and again, I've observed it magically, but I don't know the mechanism of how it works. But what I've observed over and over again with these destructive tides is when they flow into an area and through and around the people end up getting marked. It's like something sticks to them. I don't know what it is. I don't know how it operates. And I couldn't describe it to you other than like it's a mark. Now, I don't know if it's the tide itself that brings that in, if it's beings, because tides bring beings with them. So you get destroying beings ride tides. What a lot of magicians would call demons, which is the Christian idea of demon is Hollywood, really. They're destructive beings, but they ride these destructive tides and operate through them. And their job is to destroy. That's what they do. It's like, you know, they break things down like bacteria. They also bring in a lot of parasites because it's good food. Destructive tides bring good food. So there's all these different beings. I don't know what brings those marks with them, whether it's the parasites, these underworld beings, or the actual tide itself. But the marks get on people, and it makes them more visible to parasites and to these destroying beings. It makes them more visible to the inner consciousness of pandemics. Like, you know, when you have an outbreak of a disease, it starts to build up a pattern that becomes like a collective consciousness. And when you're working magically with disease, often you have to get rid of the inner disease before you get rid of the outer disease. And it often has beings with it and marks. And this wave is bringing in marks. And the ritual bath will take that off. And especially there's a listing utterance that you do, and it's an old one that's been used for hundreds of years, so it just works like a light switch. You don't need to do anything to it. You can add in to the recitation and any marks of destruction or death into the list of, and this will remove from my body and my spirit, blah, 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 and any marks of destruction, any marks of death, any beings that bring disease. It's a shopping list. You're basically listing. And you're not asking the bath to do it. This is, you are focusing this pattern of ritual cleansing. You are focusing it and not commanding. You're just programming it to, and take off this, 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 and this. And it does it. As long as you don't alter the actual ritual utterance that makes it work. You can add into the list. Don't take away from it. So for magicians, you know, every full moon, new moon, you know, the bottom of the tide, the top of the tide, is get a ritual bath. Put the utterance of the marks into it. If you're older, you've got a weaker immune system, or if you're carrying a very heavy burden, magically or otherwise, this would be a time to do a talisman and stick it on and leave it on. The 4-directional one works with land powers, and they will put in what is necessary for you. If you want something that's more than bleach, then the only person in the world I trust to make a magical talisman is a man called Walter Ogris, who's based in Austria. He now has a website. He can come across as pretty eccentric to younger people. He's German speaking, but fuck me, his talismans are good. And they're expensive, but they are good. They are really good magically. And I know magicians all over the world and have known magicians for decades. And talismans from all different cultures, very powerful magicians. Nothing like Walter's. Walters are the deal. I'm going to do a McDonald's advertising. Walters are the deal. But it's an expense and it's complicated. It takes time. You know, he does them properly. For your own, if you're wanting to be a magician and learn, you become self-reliant in everything that you do. And opening the gates, it's in the first module of how to do that. You will learn to open the gates. You learn how to call the powers. Very basic. If the need is there in your fate pattern, and it is within your fate pattern that you can be protected, then it will all switch on. And you go around the directions, follow what it says in the lesson, and you ask for whatever protection is necessary for you for this next, and you give it a period of time, 3 months, 6 months, whatever. Do that. And that is not like a Hollywood talisman that will stop everything and anything. What it will do is add a layer. It's like a bulletproof vest. A bulletproof vest will stop a bullet coming to your chest, unless if it's point blank, it probably won't. If somebody puts a gun to your head, a bulletproof vest is not going to protect you, right? Think about it in real terms. All of these things are layers. So you would not only have a bulletproof vest on if you're going into battle, you would also have a helmet on, you would have this on, you'd have that on, blah, de, blah, de, blah, de, blah. That's how magic works. You have layers. One layer is keeping clean, keeping marks off of you and keeping clean. If you keep clean, it makes a huge fucking difference. Even if you get sick. I think it's in magical healing, There's work where you can learn, if you're okay with visionary magic and you've got the basic skills down in visionary magic, and it's something I discovered by accident decades ago, and it actually works, is you go in vision into your body and you clean up. And you clean up using the tools that you would use if you were cleaning your house, because then you're giving the visual language to beings that are around you to work with you. So you get a vacuum cleaner and you back out your lungs. Very, very simple things. There's all of these different things. As a magician, you should know not only how to protect yourself, keep yourself clean, to protect your environment, you should also know how to heal. You should know how to walk into death and come back out again. You should know how to exercise. You should know how to construct not only a temple, but construct a protective bubble, which is a real construction, not just, I'm going to throw protection around something. No, to actually spend 3 months constructing something that will last for hundreds of years. Sometimes that's necessary. All of these different skills, while we're actually still in the good times. Even though it might not appear to be, we're actually still on the tail end of the good times. Use this time to learn your skills, because you will need them in the times that come.
That is incredibly valuable, a fountain of wisdom. I hope that the listeners, and I know myself, really will take this to heart and think about this and act on it and really do some deep work. Author, occultist, magical teacher, tarot expert, and just awesome person. Josephine McCarthy, thank you so much yet again just for sharing your time and your wisdom and coming back on the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me, and thank you to the listeners for the questions, because that always makes such a difference, because I don't know what people want to talk about, what they want to hear, so it sets up a conversation. I've also got a blog at josephinemccarthy.com. I haven't been on it recently because I've been working my ass off for the last few months. Obviously, with everything going on, I'm pretty busy. I'm busy working on projects which I won't tell you what they are at the moment, other than it's taking a magical act away from the structures in magic, like the gods, the goddesses, the temples, the magical wands, and all of this sort of thing. Taking it beyond there and looking at the powers behind, and looking at how you can communicate with the powers and how you can work with them in divination. That's my project at the moment that I'm working on, and as I get close to the end, then I'll give everyone a sneak preview, and I'll give you a sneak preview. Well, you're getting sneak previews anyway, because I'm showing you what I'm doing, and he's not going to tell you, because if he does, I'll slit his throat. So he's keeping it quiet because he wants to live. But yes, as we get nearer the time, we'll get there.
That's right, Josephine. In fact, I have no idea what you're talking about. So yes, exactly. No, that is awesome. We will certainly make sure to link to your blog below, and yes, we will keep our ear to the ground for any updates. We look very much forward to the next time that you're on.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you to everyone that's bought the book or is going to go buy the tarot book. Thank you. That is keeping us fed. It makes a big difference to us. And I hope everyone enjoys the book, and I hope that if they find some of the mistakes that we missed, because it was both written and edited in super fast speed because we had so much work going on. If you find them, you get a sweetie.
A sweetie sounds good.
Sweeties, you get sweeties. Well, thank you, really, thank you. You're the best podcaster I've come across, and I love coming on your show. You're a joy to work with. Thank you.
Listeners, I hope you enjoyed that chat with Josephine McCarthy as much as I did. Josephine is effectively esoterically imparting onto us vital medicine and wisdom that can help us heal, focus, and align ourselves as magicians, practitioners, and esotericists in order to do the deep, necessary work on ourselves so that we can have a solid foundation upon which lasting practice can be built in order to help others as well. Also, thank you so much to each and every Glitch Bottle supporter for helping keep the lights on and the show gears turning, and for your wonderful questions, which really take the conversation into new and interesting directions. Also, there is a special announcement as well for Glitch Bottle. You can now support Glitch Bottle on Subscribestar.com as well as on Patreon for exclusive benefits and other bonuses. Just click the link in the video description if you're interested, or you can always visit subscribestar.com/glitchbottle or Patreon if you'd like to support the podcast, get exclusive guest content and blog post content, chat with other supporters, and more. As always, this is Alexander F. reminding us all to invoke often, uncork the uncommon, and keep the light.